That's why we tackle, we break it down clearly. Yeah.
Monday, September 18th at 5:01 p.m. and we'll start with our review of agenda and items on consent. Anybody have any comments, council? No. Any councilor concerns? All right. We'll start with our pre-council work session and hear from Mr. Stone on the Information Technology Strategic Plan. While he's getting set up, I wanted to note to the council that we do have 4 pretty dense items for our work session, and so we'll try to stick to 30, the time estimated for each one, and if it turns out we need more time on any of these, let's see if we can, if we need to, we'll find time later, unless they're on the consent agenda. All right. Please proceed.
All right. Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Andy Stone, and I have the pleasure of being the IT Director for the City of Wilsonville. Tonight, I'd like to share with you our newest iteration of the IT Strategic Plan. Our first IT strategic plan was developed in 2016 and was very successful. It guided us through major projects like the new phone system and the implementation of our financial and permitting software packages. Since we had accomplished most everything that we had set out to do with that plan, we decided to refresh our strategic plan with the help of the Avero advisors. They join us tonight virtually. I'll hand the presentation over to Tyler Gallant, our project manager, and let him introduce the team and describe the project, and we'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have. So, Tyler?
Thank you so much, Andy. Thank you to all the council members. Hi, my name is Tyler Gallant, project manager with Avero Advisors. I'm joined here with Andrew Hayes, our senior manager.
Good evening.
And yeah, as Andy said, we had the pleasure of working with the city in developing its new edition of the IT strategic plan. So we put together a brief presentation. We know that the council agenda is pretty packed this evening, so we'll go ahead and get through it. So we'll briefly just introduce our project team, discuss our project methodology, the different deliverables. We'll review the strategic roadmap, which was the main output of this project, and discuss a few project takeaways, and then we'll be happy to take any questions at the end that you all might have. So as mentioned, I'm Tyler Gallant, the project manager. There's Andrew Hayes, the senior manager, and also on the project we had Sarah Quesenberry, who was our technical consultant, and our director of advisory services, Robert Krnavich, who could not join us this evening. As far as the project methodology and timeline, it was 9 milestones within this 2-phase initiative. It started first with a project planning and kickoff presentation, which my voice unfortunately went out during, but we still got through it. And that is where we set up a lot of the framework for communication throughout the project and really just laid the foundation for how this was going to go. We then had an executive visioning session where we had all directors, departmental directors, join and discuss their vision for their departments in terms of IT. We then had more focus groups doing current state discovery, meeting with all the different departments to really get a good understanding of where they stand in terms of the tools that they're using, the services that they're receiving, and so forth. Next, we had the technology risk assessment, which is a confidential document that focused on cybersecurity. Definitely encourage you all to speak to Beth and Andy if you wanted to talk a little bit more about that. Next, we had IT modernization visioning sessions to quickly validate the information collected previously and talk a little bit more about vision for each department, which all fed into the current state of IT assessment, which gave a succinct summary as to any of the opportunities that existed within each department. Certain things that that could be addressed or improved. From that, we had IT modernization strategies. We had this was a really fantastic effort, on the IT department at the city of Wilsonville. They came to the table with a lot of, their own ideas and their own strategies that they had in mind. It was, extremely refreshing to have this be such a collaborative effort with both Beth and Andy, and I can't say enough how wonderful it was working with them. Once the strategies were identified, we put them into an IT strategic roadmap that prioritized each strategy, spanning out between the next, 3 to 5 years. And then the final deliverable was an IT strategic plan, which is a rather lengthy document that encompasses the current state assessment and executive summary, and then it details each of the strategies that are included within the roadmap. And this was all completed within between March and July of this year. So again, these were the different deliverables that were outputs from the project. One of those also included a SWOT analysis. And so, we really honed in on, what the city's major strengths are and also opportunities. One of the biggest strengths, I would say, is just the city's follow-through with the strategic plan from 2016, as Andy mentioned. It's not often that we come back into, new engagements and have a previous client that already completed the strategic plan from years prior. So, we really want to give kudos there. It was really wonderful to see that and to see how seriously the city takes, IT initiatives. Each strategy that was included in the strategic plan followed this template that you see here. I won't go into all the details, but essentially each strategy covers, the different gaps that it is addressing, all the key players that will, need to be utilized to complete the strategies, anyone who will be affected. It also included estimated timeline, estimated cost, and an impact statement, just essentially describing what that strategy is addressing. All of the strategies that were put forth within the IT strategic plan and roadmap fit within this ITSP framework. All 4 of these different categories, all of the strategies fit into one of these here. So we have security first, digital city experience, data-driven decisions, and infrastructure resiliency. And as I said, we had strategies that fit into, every single one of these. So security first, simply put, it's the city puts, security at the forefront of, of its IT infrastructure. We know that leadership at the city is very focused on cybersecurity, and so all of these strategies either pertain to cybersecurity or the city's physical security. Digital city experience, these are all strategies that are, really impacting and improving the lives of the folks that work at the city and also, community members that utilize the different services that the city provides. Data-driven decisions, these encompass the different systems that the city is using across, all the different departments, really looking at, do we have the right systems in place? And, are there any improvements that we can make to, any of the systems that are currently in place? And then next is, or last is infrastructure resiliency. And these are all focused on, all of the things that keep the city up and running, all the departments up and running. It's taking a look at, are we doing the right things to keep the lights on, and can we make the lights a little bit brighter? And so that's what all of those strategies are focused on. This is the ITSP, IT Strategic Roadmap as a whole. The font I can tell is rather small, but definitely encourage everyone to spend time looking through this. You can see that the strategies are laid out between 2023 and 2027. And I just want to mention that, these timelines are flexible. Things come up, certain, budgetary items come up where, we may need to shift some things around, or, personnel availability that was expected on certain initiatives may shift. So, these are all strategies that will ultimately provide a lot of value for the city, but just the timelines will potentially shift a little bit as the years go on. And finally, I wanted to conclude with just a few project takeaways. So the first is that the Wilsonville's IT leadership and team exceeds industry norms, and we're not just saying that. It was fantastic working with Beth and Andy and their team, and throughout the discovery sessions, we try to get honest and clear feedback from the different departments as to how IT service delivery, is going. And there was not one negative word said about the city's IT team, so you're really in good hands with them. The IT has a rich history of end-user satisfaction and high-quality performance that sort of speaks to what I just mentioned. Wilsonville takes a proactive approach to cybersecurity. It was very apparent throughout the project that the city takes cybersecurity very seriously, and the IT team has done a phenomenal job in making sure that the tools that are in place are supporting that. Next, the city is on the right track to continue experiencing IT wins, just given what they were able to accomplish between 2016 and the initiation of this project. I don't see any of these strategies that were proposed being too much of an obstacle for the team that you have in place. They have the right resources and they have the right in-house expertise to accomplish these. And then last is the roadmap produced will continue to support IT modernization at the city of Wilsonville. With completing these strategies, you're only going to see, greater services provided to the community members and just overall, more satisfaction with the employees that you have at the city and completing their day-to-day functions. So all in all, it was a really fantastic project, and we really enjoyed working with the city. And I told you I would try to keep it brief, so I don't think I went over the 10 minutes there, but I wanted to leave some time for any questions that anyone might have.
Councilor Linville, is that your number?
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
That's my number, I think, 6.
I have this little screen.
Oh, sorry, you turned that. Thank you for the report and the detail. Even though on that chart for the strategic roadmap, it was a little difficult. It would be nice if we could get that figure 4 in a format that we could look and enlarge. Can we do that?
Yeah, we can. Sorry, go ahead.
We absolutely can turn that over. It was built in Excel. So we absolutely can turn over the roadmap in that format, and then you can blow it up and look at it and even do maintenance to it.
Okay. And then I have 2 more questions. One of them has to do with I assume the section on infrastructure resiliency, and I just didn't see, and maybe it's here and I couldn't see it. Excuse me if I missed it. But I'm wondering about system redundancy and emergency response.
So that's kind of a continual thing that we go through. In fact, you're going to be seeing something here in the next couple meetings where we are talking about that from our EMDR site where we have our current site here. Then we have a backup site in town as well, and then we also have a cloud option too, depending on what we're talking about there.
So that system is in place and comprehensive enough that it doesn't need to be in the strategic plan?
It is something that's kind of an ongoing maintenance type of a thing. We are looking at advanced replacing a piece of that, and you will be seeing some of that coming up to council here in the next couple meetings. But it is in place right now. We do have several different layers of that, depending on what piece of information that we're talking about. So we have everything from replications to full backups to backups into the cloud too, depending on what we're looking at.
And do we have, in addition to that, do we have a system should we have overall power loss that would allow us to continue our IT operations?
So depending on the location that we're at, many of our buildings have generators that and UPSs that will bridge that gap. Some buildings don't, but all of the core functionality are in buildings that have that type of redundant system.
And I was thinking mostly about where our emergency response headquarters will be.
Yes.
And I guess that's probably going to be in the new Public Works.
Well, we actually, our main EOC is here at City Hall,
Okay.
but we do have a backup site at our SMART building right now, and we are incorporating it into the new Public Works building. We'll actually be moving some stuff out of SMART and into the Public Works building.
Okay, super, thank you. And I have one more, and that, I'm sorry, I said I had two, and I've had a whole lot more. Under the SWOT analysis, there's two items there that I would like to just hear a little bit more about, and the one has to do with the internal IT documentation, and the other, the IT staffing level.
So I can start with the staffing level. One of the things, kind of the neat things about this is it's hard to pick out a point in time. When we did a lot of this information, we were down to FTE, and we have recently been able to make two great hires for our network administrator and our systems analyst. They're doing a fantastic job. So we're actually fully staffed right now. So that is actually something that has kind of dropped off of in my mind, the weakness side of it. The internal IT documentation, what we had identified is over the last couple of years being understaffed, we were having a hard time kind of finishing up some of the, finishing out a project. We had to just jump from one to the next, and now we have the benefit of being able to take a breath and be able to kind of wrap a lot of that together. I'm not sure if Tyler or Andrew have anything else that they want to add to that.
No, it's just, it was no secret during the assessment that, the staff really appreciated the effort that you all put in and noticed how busy you all were. And so, I mean, during the assessment, that was the main thing that came up was just, they're doing a lot with, a very slim department. That's all I had for that.
Well, I know that you had done, as part of your analysis, you had done a comparable or peer analysis, and I didn't know if that was related to a weakness that you saw as related to our peers, or if it related to just our unfilled positions.
Yeah, as a lot of departments can attest, the hiring market has been difficult over the last couple of years, and we didn't want to just hire anybody. We wanted to get the right fit, and we, that complemented all of our skills and that type of thing. And we have a couple of, in fact, our entire department is working on all cylinders right now, and we couldn't do what we did without, Beth as our project manager, Dan as our GIS manager, our new network admin is Paul, and systems analyst is John. They come with some great backgrounds, and then our help desk person, Brody, they managed to garner 6 rocks at the last staff picnic, so they are making great connections with everybody too. So that's really kind of where the core of our group is.
Yeah, super. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Councilor Dunn.
I have a couple of questions. First of all, and I know in the SWOT analysis, discuss project fatigue is always a catch-all in threats. But can you expand on that a little bit about what we would consider project fatigue, just because, IT is such a moving target? You talking financial investment or?
So there's a lot, right, from that. We have had a lot of projects in some trying circumstances between COVID and all that kind of stuff, and keeping going, knowing knowing that we have, at the time, we had a lot less staff and just trying to keep everybody moving and doing that kind of stuff. The fatigue, I think, kind of just comes in, or the potential of fatigue comes in with just, that grind of that type of stuff. And I think, having the two additional staff members have really kind of helped us with that piece.
Yeah, I'd love to see a little bit more specificity on that.
As far as from the project fatigue.
Yeah, when you're saying project fatigue, to identify a little bit what that's comprised of.
So I think if Tyler and Andrew want to jump in, my take on it real quick is just that jumping, one thing to another, kind of what I mentioned before, of not being able to have that ability to finish out a project before another fire kind of pops up or a timeline pops up with things that need to be done, and just that kind of continual trying to make sure that we're meeting everybody's needs. But Andrew, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, Andy. So, with us having the opportunity to speak with folks from across the organization, the feedback that we got, first off, is your IT team is doing a fantastic job. They got such a big jump. Normally when we come in, things are kind of bad, for organizations, and you guys are so far ahead given all the progress from the 2016 plan. But part of that effort specifically involves your enterprise software systems. And when you look at all the work that's been done in the last couple years, that specifically is where the project fatigue is going to come into place. When you're replacing those systems, it's very, very trying. And your team actually managed that internally and saved the city hundreds of thousands of dollars. So, as somebody that leads large teams, implementing these types of software systems, I believe that Andy and Beth are to be commended for their effort there. And, those types of efforts definitely take their toll on the organization because, people only have so much energy and they only have so much time. And they have competing priorities. It's, well, we want you to perform at the highest level as far as operations goes and keeping the city running and serving the citizens and our customers. But at the same time, we also need you to focus on all these tasks related to these new software systems that we're implementing. So when we had the opportunity to talk with folks from across the organization, they did say that. They said, we've got an IT team that is always there for us, but they're super busy and they get a lot of stuff done and they've always got these projects lined up. And at some point you have a little bit of burnout. And while we're, about 18 months or so removed from that implementation and we're optimizing things at the city, that's still very, very fresh in people's minds. So when you hear them say, I'm burned out, I got a little bit of fatigue from these projects, that happens.
I get that. I completely understand where you're coming from. I use project fatigue in SWOT analysis, and I'm always asked, be specific. So I'm going to ask you to do the same thing, just to at least expand on that. So from a historical perspective, if we look back on that 2 years from now, we understand what that meant and where it came from. And the only other thing that I have is more of a comment, and that's on page 7 or page 14 of our packet, and that is regarding the data-driven decisions and action items. And it's just more of a comment on the customer relationship management system, because we have a relatively large senior population who are not necessarily digital natives. We need to be compassionate towards their needs and frustrations where it's not necessary, where, as much as we would love to have everything online for them, to really know as customers and building that relationship that we have another path for them to be able to communicate outside of becoming so IT dependent that it creates a challenge for them to at least be able to interact with the city.
Yes, yeah, absolutely agree that it's not a one-size-fits-all model, and you're always going to have the community members that would rather come in than mess around with a portal or, something online. So definitely keeping that in mind.
Yeah, and that's just more of a comment. I mean, I know that you're already thinking through that, but I think it's something we always have to be cognizant of in any of our communities.
Yeah, that's a very good
Absolutely.
point. Thank you.
Thank you. Council President Ockervall.
Thank you. Thank you for the the presentation today. And I have a few questions about the benchmarking section of the report, the written report. And I was able to connect a little with Andy over the last day or so on this. But I wonder if you could also add some perspective and maybe some commentary on this section. Specifically, in the benchmarking, figure 3 of that section, so this is page 21 of our packet, there's a number of different kind of variables that the benchmarking represents, and including population, city budget, IT budget. I was a little confused at looking at some of the city budget, IT budget figures, and they're just surprised at some of the data that was presented. Like, for instance, I think Woodburn is presented with having 3 times the city budget that Wilsonville is presented having, and that was a surprising figure for me. But then also looking at the IT budget in relation to the city budget, like for instance, Tigard has almost, looks like $50 million city budget, and then over $6 million for the IT. So that would be more than 10% of their city budget is going to IT. So it really just seemed like it was all across the board, and I was having a hard time gleaning information that would be helpful for us in that chart comparison. Now, a lot of the text was more about the types of projects that these different cities are undertaking, and maybe that's where the better takeaway is from, but I wonder if you can just kind of elaborate on what you saw in this benchmarking that would be helpful information for the city.
Yeah, the numbers themselves, this was a very high-level analysis in terms of benchmarking. We looked at other organizations' budgeting documents. So, I mean, we pulled the numbers that were, made available to us. And something I'll say about, the variations in IT budgets is, from organization to organization, you have, some organizations where all IT purchases, all things IT exist within the IT budget. Whereas you have other organizations where, each department has their own IT budget included in their own. So that's where you're going to see a lot of those variations. And yeah, just to echo what you just said about the projects, I mean, that should really be the main focus of this section is, and also the IT staff members. I think that was, some of the bigger focuses on this, and taking a look at the different projects that your neighboring cities are taking on versus, what the city of Wilsonville is currently focusing on, I think should give the reader a pretty good understanding of, where the city is at in comparison to others.
Well, I wonder if some of the budgets that look so different may include their own police department, their own fire department. We have our water department, we contract for police. We don't run a jail, others do. So this wouldn't be an apples to apples, but you're saying that it gives us just an idea. It's a starting point. Mm-hmm. But it's not a scientific comparison, really, until somebody probably needs more IT if they have their own police department.
Yeah, it was interesting with the whole span of everything. We were still, a lot of all these areas are still doing all the same projects, right? They're doing a lot of ERP, they're doing fiber, they are implementing 365, which we found kind of interesting, is that despite how it shows up on the budgetary side, we're all doing a lot of the same projects.
And were all of these during the same time frame?
I believe so.
They were?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But end of day, do you feel that we're appropriately sized, I guess, for what we're attempting to do and what our peers are attempting to do?
I think with the addition of, the staff that the IT department was looking to, to source. I think that the city's in a very stable place. I think that they've set up their infrastructure in such a way that, they pushed a lot of the responsibilities that would typically be held in-house off to the vendor and, sort of into the cloud, which really frees up a lot of time for them to focus on projects and customer service, which, really shows when you talk to the different departments within the organization.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
If I could, I just have one more quick. Are we fully implemented? Is our ERP fully implemented at this point?
Yeah, we are considering it fully implemented. What we are looking at doing right now is what we refer to as the optimization stage.
Right.
So it is very dynamic, so we are doing upgrades every year, and now that we're there, we're kind of taking a look at everything and trying to make it a little cleaner for everybody.
Do you have to create reports that out of the new system that weren't necessarily provided? Are you having to do that?
A little bit, yeah. We are doing a little bit of SSRS reporting, which John has dove into, and a few other things. There are some reports that are very similar to the other ones, but we've tweaked the older ones over time, so we're trying to kind of tweak those to kind of more what we're used to.
All right, thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And we appreciate the in-depth report and look to more continued cybersecurity.
And we want you to know that we appreciate all that you do.
Absolutely. We
Great.
never said that. Andy, great job.
Great job that you do.
Effort, but thank you.
Thanks, Andy, and thanks, Beth.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you all.
Absolutely.
So that brings us to our next item, the Town Center Urban Renewal Feasibility Study.
Okay. Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Matt Lorenzen. I'm the city's Economic Development Manager, and urban renewal falls within my purview and my job description. I'm joined this evening by our consultant on this project, Tiberius Solutions. Principal is Nick Popinuk, here with us tonight. I'll be referencing both the slides that we see on the screen right now as well as the staff report. So if you're able to navigate between those, appreciate that. I did something a little bit differently with this presentation, and I provided the slides ahead of time. We have quite a bit of meat here in this presentation, and so it seemed appropriate to provide you with some of that data in advance. In the event that you wanted to spend a little bit more time with it in advance of the meeting. So before I jump into project timeline, I want to pause just momentarily and for the sake of anyone watching, as well as newer council members or even just anyone needing a refresh, we're talking about urban renewal tonight. The synonym that we use for urban renewal is tax increment finance. And under tax increment finance or an urban renewal plan, we are revitalizing or activating a certain portion of the city that is defined in statute as blighted. And that's a fairly strong word to use, but we're going to talk in this presentation a little bit more about what that word blight means from a statutory perspective. The tax increment piece is, the notion involved here is that when we set up a new urban renewal plan, the tax base is frozen in time, as it were, and those affected taxing districts that collect taxes from that area receive that same amount of taxation on an annual basis, tax revenue, I should say, for the duration of the urban renewal plan. But we know that tax assessed value goes up over time, just generally speaking, through the appreciation of property values. And we know that new development, which is one of the main goals of urban renewal, also increases the tax base. It's that increase above the frozen base that goes toward urban renewal and that we use to pay debt that we have financed under urban renewal over time. So that's very brief and very succinct. Urban renewal is such a technical concept, but I always try and start out with that brief review.
Excuse me, Mr. Lorenzen, on that point of just a brief update or overview, I just wanted to acknowledge how much I appreciated the detail under those qualifications for urban renewal, how to qualify for that you have in the packet, and also ask if you could confirm that it is correct to describe this type of tax increment financing as not a new tax.
That's absolutely right. So this does not increase the tax rate in any way whatsoever. So that if we think of the tax collection as a pie, we're not making that pie bigger in any way. We're splitting the pie into more pieces and allocating certain pieces of the pie for very specific uses.
Thank you.
Did I do okay with that, Nick?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. So timeline-wise, and I'm going to try and speed up a little bit, for which I apologize in advance, but just keeping track of the time and want to have enough time for discussion. We're here on September 18th for the third council briefing on this topic and on this project. We are going to be meeting with the task force again in mid to late October to take our next steps, which deal with identifying and refining the projects that may be approved under this plan, timing and prioritization of those projects. We'll meet again with the task force closer to the holidays to look at potential draft ballot language, which we'll be developing in conjunction with our legal team, and a communications plan to broadcast out to the community about this potential plan, which would be executed in the winter and spring. We'll bring these items back to you, the projects, as the task force has refined them, as well as the ballot language and the communications plan, and hopefully even some example pieces of collateral in December for a fourth briefing. And then, as I noted, in the winter and spring, we'll be executing that plan and communicating out to the community, which will eventually be voting on this question throughout those early months of 2024. Tentatively, the February 5th meeting will be your opportunity to approve ballot language that will go on that May ballot. From that point forward, our communications with the community have to be approved through the Secretary of State, and we hope that package will be fully approved at that point. You see a couple other benchmark dates there that culminate with the May 21st advisory vote, and I'll just underscore that word advisory. So it's non-binding, but of course, precedent would suggest that if the community speaks one way, you might be inclined to heed that direction, but it is non-binding. And then, assuming there is an outcome of a yes to the potential plan, we would need the months of June, July, and August to prepare that plan formally and adopt it with the council in order to secure the tax increment on the timeline that we've been discussing throughout this project. Maybe I'll pause there for a moment and just ask for questions on timeline. Okay. At this point, I'm going to hand it to Nick. We have a lot of confidence in Nick and his team and the financial calculations that they do in order to help us project the financial capacity of a potential urban renewal area. And because he steeps in this stuff day in and day out, I'm going to pass the microphone to him and let him cover this section of the presentation.
Okay, thank you, Matt. And we will try to move through these slides fairly quickly as well. My team focuses on public finance, and urban renewal at its core is a public finance tool. How are you paying for infrastructure in these areas in order to see and achieve the revitalization that you're looking for? So there's a lot of work that goes into evaluating an urban renewal plan or the feasibility of one but a core piece of that analysis is understanding its financial capacity. Over a reasonable time frame, how much new construction is expected to occur in the area, and how much revenue do we think that would generate that would be available to fund the projects in the area. And so that's the core of this analysis here. In Oregon, our property tax system is unique in that there's a very clear distinction between your real market values and your assessed values. And that results in the assessed values of existing properties only increasing by 3% per year. And that 3% happens more or less like clockwork. So when we're doing a forecast of tax revenues in an area, we really care about that new construction value, because that's going to be the factor that changes the trajectory of growth in this area from slow and steady 3% to anything that gets above that on a growth curve. So that's what this analysis looks at. The next slide starts with forecasting how much of this area is going to redevelop in the future and what might it redevelop as. And all of the assumptions that you see on the screen here were developed by city staff. So I'm the finance guy, but in this particular piece of analysis, I was collaborating heavily with your own staff in the planning department, as well as members of the Urban Renewal Task Force that have expertise in private sector development, real estate, property management, and all the key pieces of the puzzle that we need to understand for forecasting growth in the area. So this area is approximately 144 acres in size, and we estimate that a little less than half of that, roughly 64 acres, would be likely to redevelop in the coming 2-3 decades. The remaining property in the area would either stay with its existing uses, because there's plenty of buildings there that still have a lot of life left in them, or it would be space that would be needed for public rights of way as you build out the street network here, or parks and open space. So not all of this area is going to be brand new development. A little less than half is what we forecast. The columns on the right hand of this slide are showing what we anticipate those developments would be. And the majority of the new construction here we see as being mixed use, which is really residential with ground floor retail space on it, and then standalone employment uses, which could include commercial, retail, hotels, any type of employment, and then standalone apartment buildings. There is a much smaller amount of anticipated development here for townhouses and condos, as well as tax-exempt, say, nonprofit-owned buildings. And the townhomes and condos, the reason those aren't larger is largely due to the minimum densities that are required by zoning here, as well as market factors that have a particular impact on condo development in Oregon right now. This slide is showing the exact same information, but we just formatted the chart in a couple of different ways because it might be easier for folks to digest one way or the other. So again, you can see redevelopment being a little less than half of the overall acres, and then employment, mixed uses, and apartments being overwhelmingly the mix of land uses we anticipate occurring here.
Excuse me, may I ask a question? Mm-hmm. On that previous slide? On I think the one prior to that. Anyway, I wanted to ask about condos, and don't need to go into a huge amount of detail here, but is the reason, I know there have been some discussions about complications with condo ownership in this kind of a development. Is that what is holding that back? And is anything on the horizon to lighten that up?
There's nothing on the horizon right now other than potentially pent-up demand that might justify some legal change in the future. So what's really going on with the condo market is that developers are on the hook for legal liability for an extended time frame for ownership condo units. And that makes it very challenging for the contractors that are out there building condos to be able to have insurance. They don't want to be carrying around this liability that lasts for years after they've finished the project and moved on. And so a lot of those builders are saying, you know what, we're just not going to go into that product so we can have a more affordable insurance for our business. And so there's just not a lot of folks out there that have the right insurance to actually build those projects right now.
Thank you.
So ultimately, I think there will be some sort of a legislative fix at some point in the future, but nothing on the horizon right now.
So just...
Yeah, that's an issue that we've seen all across the state of Oregon. I don't believe that that is globally an issue, but it is certainly an issue across Oregon, so.
Could I ask our legislative staff, our government relations staff, to make a note of that? That might be some legislation that we want to introduce, since our state is pushing things on us that actually negatively affect our neighborhoods. This might be a time to push back and try to open up first-time home buyer opportunities.
Yeah, you could absolutely see in this town center there being a strong market demand for that product type if there were a legal framework and developers willing to build that product type.
If we could make it a little easier for them to do that. Okay, thank you.
This slide gets into the nitty-gritty details of what's being forecast here. I'm not going to go into all the specific details, but you can see the total amount of square feet of new construction, over 5 million, and that includes over 4,000 new residential units. Those numbers are large, and they are numbers that the consultant team, city staff, and the task force all took a moment to sort of absorb, and we all went back and double-checked all of the underlying technical assumptions that led into it and said, you know what, we feel really confident that we are being realistic and conservative in what we're forecasting the amount of construction here to be. This is just a large area that's got zoning that's in place that would allow a substantial amount of new construction to occur, and if you look long-term here over the next 20 or 30 years, it could be a major transformation with a lot of new buildings and a lot of new housing units that take place here.
Can you give us the definition of the acronym FAR again, please?
Yeah, absolutely. That, especially for any members of the audience that aren't steeped in land use planning vernacular every day. That's floor to area ratio. And so that's a comparison of the square footage of the site to the square footage of the building that sits on top of it. And so let's say you had a grocery store with a 1-story tall and it took up half of the site, the other half was parking and landscaping. That building would have an FAR of 0.5. The building is 1/2 the square footage of the overall site. If you start building upwards and you've got multi-story apartment buildings, that FAR can get above 1.0. So you've got more built square footage than the actual site that it's sitting on. But you can see here where we're looking at the FAR, between 1 and 2.5. These are not anticipated to be skyscrapers. These are, by and large buildings that are less than, say, 5 stories tall, but they're not monoliths that take up their entire footprint. There's still plenty of open space and surface parking and things like that. These next 2 slides are showing the anticipated absorption here. This one's showing it on a per year basis. A couple of key takeaways is that we do think for all the apartments and mixed use development, there is steady demand for that product today. If the infrastructure was in place in this area to allow that development to occur, we would be seeing that construction taking place ASAP. When it comes to the employment uses, we actually think that it's going to take a while before the market catches up. And that's not necessarily particular to Wilsonville, but the broader Portland region happens to have a glut of excess commercial properties right now, particularly in the office market, just with everybody working from home. There's a lot of oversupply that needs to get worked through the system before we start to see demand for new product of that type. And then for the townhomes and condos, we kind of show those as blips on this forecast over time. They're not anticipated to be sustained long-term product types, but hopefully in the future there is a solution to those product types where we see some of it get built in the area. The next slide is showing this same forecast, but just cumulative over time. So you can see mixed use is really the dominant force here, with apartments and employment being substantial as well. Those previous slides dealt with how much construction would take place and what types of construction. Now we start to transition to how much that construction would be valued. For all of these assumptions, again, we spoke with members of the Urban Renewal Task Force that have experience in real estate development and property management. They pointed us to examples of projects that they're currently working on across the region, as well as existing projects in the city that are good comparables for the type of construction they envision taking place in the area. And from that, we're able to come up with, in today's market, what the value of those buildings would be. Again, we're looking at something here, but around $300 to $400 per square foot for new construction, with certain high-end types of residential being more than that. And on a residential per unit basis, we're looking at things in the $360 to $450 range. This is just for the value of the improvements, not the land value. So if you're looking at, what the price of a townhome is in the area and saying this looks like a steal, that's because the land value is not incorporated here. Of course, if you go back in time a few years and look at these values, they'd probably be eye-opening for the opposite reason. And then you can see on the right-hand side, there's a vertical housing development zone. We do think that a substantial amount of the mixed-use residential in this area would be in the area of your city that allows for that other property tax incentive. This vertical housing development zone will give those developers a tax break. And so we make sure we keep track of that, because if they're getting a tax break there, that's generating less tax revenue for the urban renewal area. So we did factor that in to our analysis. That gets us to this chart, which is showing the increase in assessed value over time. And you can see it starts off low, but grows to be quite significant. And a reason why it is low for that first 10 years there is because new construction that does happen early on here, we do assume a lot of that's going to have that vertical housing development zone abatement. Commercial stuff won't suffer from that, but the commercial stuff we don't anticipate happening right away. So this is something that's going to start off relatively slow, but then will snowball over time as these things come on the tax roll. All of that leads us to financial capacity. There are three figures that we like to talk about when it comes to financial capacity. The first is the total tax increment revenue. So this is kind of the broadest measure of capacity. This is our forecast of all the tax revenue that the district would receive over its lifespan, which is about 30 years. These are dollars that are inflated, so they're showing that what the future tax revenue would be, but $1 million 20 years from now is not going to have the same purchasing power as $1 million today, which is why we start to look at these other metrics of financial capacity. So the second one is maximum indebtedness. We focus on that a lot because that is legally required for your urban renewal plan to have, and that is a hard limit for that plan that says this is the total amount of debt that this can undertake. You can only use your tax increment revenue to pay for debt service, so by having a debt limit, it's essentially a spending limit for your plan. And essentially that's the difference between the total tax revenue and your maximum indebtedness is the amount of interest that you'd be paying on debt service long term. So if this area incurs debt, and it does that so it can pay for more projects sooner, but now you're using some of your tax revenue to pay off interest on that debt long term, the maximum indebtedness is just the principal amount we anticipate you spend on projects. But that maximum indebtedness, due to the way that it's defined in statute, that is still in those future dollars that haven't been adjusted for inflation. So that gets us to that final bullet point, funding for projects in today's dollars. So that's where we take that maximum indebtedness and adjust it for inflation and say, here's what the true purchasing power is of this district in terms of how much your project costs in today's dollars you could actually afford here. This slide illustrates our forecast. So the lightly shaded area in the background, that's our anticipated tax revenue long-term in future dollars. Again, starts off very humble and then grows to be over $15 million per year by the time this district closes down. So this will generate into a real powerhouse in terms of its financial capacity. And then the darker columns that you see over this lifespan are the anticipated amount you could spend on projects on an annual basis in today's dollars. And so this is a very typical pattern we see for urban renewal areas, where every few years, this is showing every 5 years, but it can vary that timing, but periodically you'll be incurring a large amount of debt that's going to allow you to fund projects above and beyond your annual cash flow. But in exchange for that, your money is tied up in those future years paying debt service. And so you've got a reduced amount that you can spend on projects in those future years. And so that's the kind of ebb and flow that we typically see with an urban renewal area. And so the next slide gets us to those results in greater detail. We don't need to go over the previous scenario column there. That's showing work that was done at the beginning of this project months ago based on preliminary estimates of development capacity. We knew those estimates were rough, and that's why we wanted to update them this summer. We are pleasantly surprised that the numbers were significantly higher, so the capacity that we're looking at now is much higher than it was when our initial forecast was done, but we're not going to bother focusing on that previous scenario much. We see that in this area, we're forecasting over the next 30 years, it could generate over $200 million of tax revenue. That would be enough to support a maximum indebtedness of $181 million. technically, over 30 years, it generates a capacity for more than 181 million, but there are other formulas in statute that say what is the highest amount of maximum indebtedness that an urban renewal plan can have. I won't go into all the math, but 181 million is the highest amount that an area with this boundary is allowed to have. And so we capped it at that level. There are ways that you can get approval from other taxing districts to go above that, but that's a politically challenging process. So we limited our analysis to this figure. And that $181 million maximum indebtedness, when we adjust for inflation, shows that you'd be able to support a project list in today's dollars of a little over 100 million. The next numbers below on that chart are showing when that 100 million of capacity would be available over time. And you can see in the early years, it's not like you can run out and fund $100 million worth of projects tomorrow. The first 5 years, we're looking at just $3.5 million of capacity. But then as those projects come on the tax roll, that continues to increase over time. So almost 10 million in the following 5 years, almost 20 million in the following 5 years. So this is definitely a snowballing, compounding growth scenario that you have here. And the next couple of slides, caveats, always want to make sure that folks understand these numbers that we have here. We did a lot of work. We collaborated with city staff and with members of this task force, but nothing is set in stone. We're talking about 3 decades of projecting the real estate market, and so there's going to be lots of ups and downs over that cycle. This is our best guess at this point in time, but a lot of things here are speculative. Ultimately, future inflation, financing terms are all uncertain. That will affect the amount of borrowing capacity that you have here. So this is an estimate, but definitely not written in stone. And then when we get to our conclusions, any maximum indebtedness above 181 million would require that concurrence from affected taxing districts. That doesn't mean that it's impossible. It just means that you would have a harder political road to go if you wanted to pursue something at that level. Estimated to be sufficient to fund $100 million of projects in today's dollars. This says this is a 28-year estimated duration. I think in our final analysis, it wound up being 29 years, but that's a very typical time frame for urban renewal in the state of Oregon. A lot of folks initially look at saying, well, could we do something in 20 years? Realize that a lot of that capacity doesn't come until later than that, especially when you're dealing with vertical housing development abatements that reduce your revenues in those early years. And so they wind up being closer to 30 years for their time frame. One last thing I would say before we turn it over to Matt on the findings of blight is that this is just a projection of the financial capacity. Ultimately, what the task force will be looking at, what you'll be looking at, what voters will be looking at is not just these financial numbers, but also what's the vision for the area? What are the projects on the list that you're going to be able to fund with these dollars? What's the complete funding picture in terms of other sources of revenue that be able to pitch in and help pay for these projects, recognizing it's not just urban renewal that's going to build all the infrastructure that's out there. And then how does this impact your overlapping taxing districts, including the city's general fund? So those are all the key pieces of the puzzle that we'll be working with the task force on in the next couple of months, and then coming back to you on, and then ultimately going out to the voters on. Matt?
Yeah, we'll try and cover the blight portion briefly, and I think that that's possible. As I noted, statute requires that we document and demonstrate that conditions of blight exist in the area. I've outlined on the screen here the actual statutory references and just highlighted key phrases that I think we can all that makes sense to us when we look at the town center area right now. There are certainly large property vacancy, maybe not numbers, but we have a very sizable and very visible vacancy in town center, for example. We know that the lot configuration sizes are something that is challenging, and I would again think of that one particular site that consumes over 15 acres. Inadequate streets and rights of way. We know that the town center plan envisions a total street network instead of just drive aisles that go through a single-story shopping complex. And so you get the idea. Statute requires that we document at least one of these conditions, but we have counted and documented no less than 5 of these conditions. And so we feel that we're on very safe footing as far as documenting the blighted conditions in the area. Here's just an overview shot for reference. It's 5:59, and we have until 6. Let's, I think, maybe pause there and take any discussion that may exist, recognizing that we're short on time.
Well, before we go to the questions, I just wanted to check on the agenda. We have the Coffee Creek Code assessment discussion tonight at work session. We have staff here ready to present that, and as well as the solid waste franchise agreement. And we have 45 minutes for both of those. Does that still sound doable?
Yes, and I was just going to note, Mayor, that our work session at our next council meeting is pretty open right now. So for the solid waste topic, if there's a portion of it that we can save and just move to the next work session if we don't get to it. So I would say if we get 15 to 20 minutes minimum, that would be great.
Okay.
So these two topics, this topic and the next topic, I know are of particular interest to the council. So
Thank you.
Actually, I'd like to propose something different. I think that there is a significant amount of information that we still need to digest after hearing your presentation today. I believe we could use up the full 45 minutes just with our questions and some of the dialogue that goes back and forth. I would actually like to see if you could finish your presentation as you had said, and then we can actually come back to you at the next work session with questions, because I do have a lot of comments on this.
Mayor, I'll defer to you, of course.
Well, I would like to take, I hear what you're suggesting. I'd like to take some questions and see how far we can get. So I think let's hear the rest of your presentation to begin with.
Sure. I mean, I have a few other visuals that help demonstrate the blighted point. If we look at existing conditions and compare to an artist's rendering of what may be in the future, you see a pretty robust infrastructure network that's required to support that development that doesn't exist today and will require significant public investment in order for it to occur. I think that's really the key takeaway if we're going to be succinct. The only other intended point here is that I don't have a slide on, but next steps in your staff report, Nick touched on it. Our next real task before us with the task force is to really dig deep into the identification and refinement of projects. And I think that's probably where a lot of the dialogue with council may exist as well. If we need to continue this conversation in our next meeting, I'm happy to return. There's no objection from me. I would just point out the 4 bullet points on the bottom of page 3. These are the sort of qualifying criteria for projects that we should be considering under a potential urban renewal plan. And we believe that those projects we've identified to date fit these criteria. We would also invite discussion at either this meeting, time permitting, or at a future briefing with the council, thoughts about other programs or projects that could be funded using urban renewal in part, in addition to other funds. And they would need to meet these criteria. And these criteria are not statutory, but they're criteria that were actually shared by Nick, and I think that they make a lot of sense in helping us to remain on sound footing as we ask our affected taxing districts and residents to buy in to a certain slate of projects. So those criteria include that the private development envisioned in their area will not occur, or will not occur as quickly or with as much value without the public investment from the city, or intervention, it says here. A project on the list should be necessary to stimulate or support private development, and I think those are two distinct action words there: stimulate or support. The city's planning to commit significant other resources to these projects, again demonstrating to our affected taxing districts that we're going to co-invest here. And then finally, that the duration of a plan that would be necessary to fund these projects is within reason and appropriate.
Okay. So that was your presentation.
Absolutely.
So we're going to keep moving. Go to Councilor Linville, who had a question, comment.
Well, I will not try and preempt the work of the task force because I know they're going to look at projects. But But just looking through the slides and the infrastructure needs of this area that relate to sewer, water, maybe transportation, through roadways, some of the things that I would assume will be on that list. I'm concerned that we're not going to have enough money to do all of those projects in total, and I think they're probably the foundational thing. So I'll be interested to see what that project list looks like when the task, I think you've got your work cut out for you. So trying to figure out what we could do and where the additional resources are going to come from. And then I guess the only...
Before you go to that, could we ask if there's a response to that on how the amount of money needed, how the 181 million was derived? And do you have any brief response on that one?
Well, yeah, so the 181 million is based on the assessed value of the area when it's created, and there's a whole formula and statute that relates to that. So a larger boundary could, in theory, have a larger maximum indebtedness. But then there's the conflicting issue of, well, how long do you want your plan to be around for? Again, this one is right on the cusp of 28 or 29 years. Most jurisdictions don't want to set up a plan that goes more than 30 years, just wanting to make sure that they're being respectful of the impact on overlapping taxing districts. So it could potentially be a little bit higher if you wanted to stretch it out a little bit longer and get concurrence from the overlapping taxing districts. But this is about as much as we anticipate. Again, if there weren't the vertical housing development zone in the area, there would be also the financial capacity to do more projects sooner. But the way that it is right now, there's just going to be a bit of a slow period in the beginning as you wait for those projects to come back on the tax roll.
And that brings me exactly to my second question, and where we saw the peaks in terms of just the anticipated where those dollars would be available. Again, I think the task force is challenged to look at how much of those big projects where you talk about sewer and water and roads and all of that can be done on blips like this versus, a big project that's up front and the ability to spend. So again, I'll be interested to see what the results are. So if I just want to understand clearly, when we go to the taxpayers, when we go to the citizens of the community, are we asking the question of, shall the city take on this level of indebtedness to get this product? Is that, in essence, what we're going to be asking them?
I think you could phrase it a number of ways, but I do think that question is a pretty good distilled version of the question at hand. I mean, shall the city adopt an urban renewal plan to bring about the intended outcome, these projects that we list out, but within that plan is the financing strategy, the sources and uses of the revenue. Sorry for rambling, but yes, I think that's you put it well.
Yeah, the language is going to be pretty interesting to try and figure out too. Good luck, Council President.
Dunwell, do you have some questions for tonight?
I actually would like to start with a comment. And on your second chart showing what potential and the conceptual build out is, and then also looking at some of your financial projections, it clearly lends more towards multifamily housing. And just humor me for a second. Living in Wilsonville and Villebois in a city that doesn't necessarily have a town center or a downtown per se, what Villebois has offered us is an area where you can walk safely. You feel like you can start to build a community. We also have Frog Pond, which is building its own little community. And at least one of the things that I saw as the vision for town center is that's where it all comes together. And what I see as missing in this concept is we still have the town center park, which already exists, But other than that, there's nothing else. And I've had multiple citizens approach me in my short time in office and asking, where is that community heart? And this does not feel like a community heart. This feels like a lot of multifamily housing and some commercial development. So is it creating more central park that goes through that? And again, have fun working on this. But thinking through that, of that spaces where individuals can come together. I'm not saying necessarily building a swimming pool or something like that, but I'm saying that having that ability for individuals to come together outside of that town center park, whether it's flow through smaller parks throughout the area or whatever it may be.
Thank you. I just wanted to add something here that we also have our town center master plan that we spent years working on. And so that was to address, and I think what I would like to do between now and the next meeting is ask each counselor to come in for a meeting and go over that town center master plan, if they haven't already recently, with Matt. Because that was, I mean, looking at this drawing doesn't help. It's a very small drawing we're looking at on the screen, but that was part of that whole effort. So they didn't miss that. But it was done before, it was done in, I think, 2019.
That's right.
And anyway, I think that would be an important recap. Council President Akkerval.
I think that's a good suggestion and a good idea. And I understand how looking at this one image that we have in front of us, it doesn't portray the amount of detail that is in that town center plan. And we had tremendous contributions from community members on that town center plan. And so there's a lot in the plan. Actually, I wonder, I'm scrolling through my packet here, Matt, and I think the next slide, it looks like, there we go. This view of the space might help kind of illustrate that linear green that you're asking about, Councilor Dunwell, on is there a flow? Is there a green space? Is it more walkable? How is that? What does that look like? And here you can see, there's the green blobs on the screen, but the idea is, as I recollect, is that starting with the pedestrian bridge over I-5, there would be a linear walking pathway that would go through different sections of the town center, concluding all the way down to Memorial Park. So it would kind of coax you along in a way that is more walkable, more pedestrian, gets people out and easier to interact with others and things like that. So I think there's a lot in the plan that we just are kind of scraping by at this look.
Yeah, it's difficult to cover it within this context. Mayor, I think that's an excellent idea to go over the town center plan again. I might just point out a couple features in addition to the emerald chain. That's right, emerald chain. The chain of parks. North to south, you see a thicker line that runs the full vertical length of town center. And this is envisioned as the spine of town center, the main street, as it were. Whether or not will be called Main Street is, of course, a question yet to be answered, but nonetheless, its function would be as a main street. Those areas that you think of where we like to spend time, whether it's Northwest 23rd, or whether it's Mississippi, or whether it's Hawthorne, or historic Willamette in West Lynn, or Main Street in Oregon City, they all have something in common, and that is you have a slowed traffic pattern, you have buildings that front of the street, you have opportunities for pedestrians to interact with stores and restaurants, places to sit, places to dine, places to have a drink. This is the type of environment that's intended along that north-south Main Street. And that acts as really the anchor point and the center of gravity for this area. And then, yes, there is other mixed uses sprinkled throughout and carefully planned. But yes, we should spend more time talking about this in the future, for sure.
And And that will be a helpful lead up for us all as we're considering the project list too. Like what elements are critical to getting to that vision as well.
Sure.
Yeah.
And one last brief point, because that's probably all we have time for.
That's a good question, too.
Councilor Berry, please.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I mean, go ahead.
Oh, yes, I was just going to respond to Councilor Linville's very astute observation that it seems like the price tags that may be attached to the projects that we've already been looking at in previous briefings may add up to more than this maximum indebtedness. I think you're right, but we're not dismayed yet at this point because we know that there will be other sources of funds to augment urban renewal. Urban renewal is not the exclusive source of funding for the projects on the project list.
So one thing I wanted to add is I think urban renewal is an excellent financing tool to get this going from what I have seen. I think it's been something that I guess I've appreciated the amount of time I ended up having just by default to hear about it multiple times from the time I was on the council until now. And it's complicated. I still wouldn't be wanting to give anyone a class on it yet. I would ask for Matt to be the speaker. But looking at the idea of freezing the tax base of what is in that district now, using that tax increment financing tool as a way to get the infrastructure started, the streets, sewers, sidewalks, to begin to attract private sector owners in that area, in that district, to then see that starting and then want to put their own dollars in. I'm seeing that as a very good way to get this started. And you're saying we also need other tools. We need other investments to meet those peaks. We may also need to look at the size of the vertical housing development zone. Is there any chance of revisiting that?
That would be a council decision.
But it's possible. I would like to suggest that as another consideration, because when I look at, I'd just like to hear about how that would go. When I look at, these slides don't have page numbers, but it's number
I think I know the slide you're thinking
or 36. Right there, right. So of the mixed-use residential, 86% of them are vertical housing development zone qualified. And at the time we looked at that, I don't think, it wasn't apparent to me that it would be that high of a percentage. In retrospect, it looks like a high percentage.
So keep in mind, this is 86% not of the whole district, but
Okay.
86% of the mixed-use residential development
Yes.
product.
Right, I understand that. And it's a high percentage of the mixed-use residential.
It's something that I've thought about, and I think it's worthy of conversation. I would just maybe add an anecdote to inform that conversation. The DRB, Development Review Board, just approved a project on the Sherry's site to redevelop and build the exact type of product that the town center plan envisions. We've been told repeatedly by that developer that that project would not be possible without vertical housing incentive.
And I just heard from a mayor in another city today of a similar sentiment. So I was just curious about that. Okay, so it's 6:19.
Can I make a comment?
Councilor Berry,
Thank you.
go ahead.
I'll keep it
I wasn't going to
brief.
stop. I was going to say we can keep going. So go ahead.
Thank you. So thank you for your presentation. I found it really informative, and I agree with the mayor. I think that this would be a really wonderful tool for this area to help the redevelopment. We really need to do something. I talk to a lot of people a lot of the time, and they often comment about, here we have this large property in the heart of the city that needs some work. But along that lines, when I'm looking at the boundary, I've also heard conversation about possibly moving the western boundary across the freeway to get some of the lots that are along the frontage of the highway, frontage lots. So I don't know if that's still something that's in discussion or where we are on that.
Yeah, at this point, the task force has been satisfied with a boundary that does not include anything on the west side of the freeway. And that's based on an assumption, which is just an assumption at this point, that there's enough capacity, financial capacity within that boundary to accomplish and complete the projects that we have in mind with urban renewal and other sources of funds. If we work on this project assessment and end up at the realization that the urban renewal funds are insufficient, then we may revisit the topic of boundary, but it would be, there needs to be a direct nexus between the properties that are included within the urban renewal area and the urban renewal plan itself. And so we would just need to be careful on that point.
Thank you.
Mayor,
Go ahead.
can I jump in just for?
Please.
I think for a couple of next steps, what I heard the council talking about is, one is having an opportunity to meet with planning staff and Matt about the town center master plan and maybe get a review of what that master plan is. I think Zoe and her team would be more than happy to help facilitate those meetings and get those, scheduled. So I'll ask all of you to kind of reach out to Zoe, and she can help work with our planning team and with Matt to get on their calendars to do that. And then the next piece was coming back at your next work session to continue this conversation. And I think Matt can also have a conversation about the vertical housing development zone at that next work session, as well as as the mayor just brought up. So I think we can tee both those up for your next council meeting. Am I missing anything else that we were talking about for next steps? Okay.
Well, I have no further questions, so if there's no need for a follow-up on another work session, it's not coming from me.
Okay. No, I think there might be some more information that if I heard the rest of the councilors that you may want to continue this conversation. So we can at least put it on the next council meeting agenda for, if it's just a short period of time, we can do that.
I think Council President Ockerville, you have your...
Do I? Oh, I don't intend to.
Okay, so it's only 6:22. I do believe we have more time for questions here. I'm not hearing any of your comments, but Matt, could you just recap what you've heard as next steps, and we hear from people if we've covered?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the assistant city manager captured it well, but we want to schedule some time to review the town center plan in more granular detail so that we are not just looking at that 30,000-foot aerial view. And we want to potentially revisit, or at least have a more nuanced discussion about the impacts of the vertical housing development zone on the early year tax increment collections. We do plan to return to brief the council, I want to say, and I have to go back to the calendar, but November, I believe, to bring you a refined project list as well as a communication strategy. Those would be the next steps as I see them. That does not include what we're doing behind the scenes as staff and a task force.
Okay. Then I think that's good enough for tonight.
Appreciate everyone's patience, including those who
Project,
may
and
have
it
lost some
does
timeline.
really deserve a lot of conversation. I am certainly up for more discussion about it, and I think everybody else is. And that brings us to the Coffee Creek Code Assessment.
Good evening, Mayor Fitzgerald and councilors. My name is Cindy Luxhoy, and Associate Planner, and I am here tonight to provide City Council with an update on the Coffee Creek Code Assessment Project and to seek input on direction of possible development code amendments to the Coffee Creek Industrial Design Overlay District. As council is aware, the Coffee Creek Master Plan area is located in northwest Wilsonville near I-5, shaded in blue on the map on this slide. The Coffee Creek Master Plan was adopted in 2007. Because the city code uses a discretionary development review process to achieve its design goals in industrial areas, the city was interested in creating a quicker and more predictable development review process using a form-based code to support employment growth in Coffee Creek. The objectives of the form-based code project were to both create code standards that would streamline light industrial development review while also ensuring high-quality design and a multimodal transportation network, accommodating pedestrians, bicycles, transit, automobiles, and freight. In 2018, the Coffee Creek Industrial Design Overlay District form-based code and accompanying pattern book were adopted. 2 land use review tracks were established. There was Class 2 administrative review by the planning director for projects meeting all the standards, or development review board review for projects with waiver requests. The code also enabled city council review of annexations and zone map amendments concurrently with other development requests. It was subject to a pilot period of 3 completed applications or 5 years. And as of 2023, both pilot period milestones have been achieved. Thus, staff has initiated the Coffee Creek Code Assessment. This slide includes the steps staff has completed to date in the assessment. Details are provided in the council staff report and attachments. To highlight some of the findings with respect to timeline, for the 4 completed development projects in Coffee Creek, the length of time from complete application to final land use approval has varied from roughly 3 to 7 months. Each application included at least 1 waiver request, triggering review by the Development Review Board. Thus, the Class 2 review process has not been utilized. In focus discussions, applicants' comments about the development review process were mostly positive. The ability to take an application to City Council public hearing for annexation and zone map amendment prior to review of other application requests was greatly appreciated and added appreciable time savings to the process. Based on the assessment completed to date, the review process is overall working as designed. However, applicants suggested that adjustments to some of the form-based code standards, particularly related to project waiver requests, could increase the number of applications that could utilize the faster Class 2 process. Some examples of possible modifications to the standards include allowing a wider driveway from a supporting street to access the truck loading and unloading areas, allowing additional parking along the building frontage on an addressing street, and allowing some of the parking spaces to be used by employees, and reducing the canopy height at the primary building entrance to align with standard storefront dimensions. These were waiver requests on multiple applications, all of which were able to mitigate or show how the alternate proposal met the intent of the form-based code design standards. Based on work to date, staff has determined that modification to the land use review tracks and process is not needed. However, staff is recommending slight adjustments to the form-based code standards to enable some applicants to use the Class 2 administrative review track while not compromising the city's ability to continue creating the envisioned connected high-quality employment center in Coffee Creek. Specific adjustments will be the topic of future discussions with council. Planning Commission was briefed on the Coffee Creek Code Assessment at their September 13th, 2023 meeting. They supported the general recommendations of city staff. And to prepare for future discussions on potential code changes, they asked a number of questions about the approved waiver requests and the original objectives of the form-based code. Work sessions on the development code amendments with Planning Commission and City Council are anticipated in December of this year. A Planning Commission public hearing and recommendation to City Council is expected in February 2024, and City Council public hearing and adoption is anticipated in March or April of 2024. Staff is seeking feedback from City Council responding to the questions posed on this slide, and this concludes my presentation tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Any comments, questions? Councilor Linville.
Thank you. I've been looking forward to this. Seems to me that it's something that I've brought up a number of times, so I'm glad to see that the analysis is done. A question that I have as I looked at the information through the packet was that there was less concern about the form-based code standards than the process. And that some of the comments were, I think, that kind of stood out to me, were that they would have liked to have the review done and the conclusions so that they could address those early on in the process, so that it didn't go, well, we're going to sit and have a conversation with you now and talk to you about your application, then you need to, and so it, I don't know whether that means that our process is what needs to have some a look at, or and I think it sounded like frustration in some of those comments, that even though when I looked at the timelines, it looked like the application was submitted and then a decision was made, and it was about a month then, and then if they resubmitted or addressed some of the concerns. But I've heard this in some of the others that are not Coffee Creek, but, and I'm just wondering if that's something that maybe we need to take a look at, or if there's a way to look at it. I don't even know if there's a way, to look at those things ahead of time before, so that they can go back and make some of those the corrections that they need to do. So that was really my concern. And I guess the only other concern that I had was if our goal was to expedite the process, and we have not, I guess overall, have we done that? Have we expedited it? Because every single application has requested a waiver. And so the process that we hoped to have happen with the administrative review is not happening. And so if we don't make changes in the form-based code, then are we still going to have that same issue that we're not going to have any administrative review? It's still going to be case by case with waivers.
Very good questions, Councilor Linville. Don't know that I can answer them all in my time allotted tonight. So I think to speak to the process, what I found when I spoke with applicants was that there were a lot of comments about process that weren't specifically related to the projects, to the process as it applies to those tracks and in Coffee Creek. There were broader concerns about application review, how much information they're given, how much information we can communicate at a pre-application meeting, when we're doing completeness review, having more frequent communication with the applicant. So it was a little bit difficult to tease out, what are the specific comments about the Coffee Creek process versus the overall land use review process. So when I said that, when we look specifically at Coffee Creek, that we don't think that there needs to be change to the process that's outlined in Coffee Creek. That's not to say that there might be other things in the broader land use review process that we should address, that we should take away from these discussions and, think about, can we integrate those into our broader process? And then the reason why we've focused onto the standards is because it's those standards that are resulting in the waiver requests. So, and with the waiver requests, then they're not able to use that quicker Class 2 review process. So how can we adjust those standards to enable applicants to go through that Class 2 review without making, more concessions in design and that we'd like to still see in Coffee Creek? We need to do more work on figuring out exactly which of those standards is it that we need to adjust, and how can we adjust them. And so that's the next step coming, because it would really be, what would be ideal is if we can get projects, that can comply with those standards, so that then they can use that quicker process.
So it seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, the most effective component of all of this that is expedited is the zone map amendment process for the city council, flipping that so that we don't have, it isn't really the code or the code amendments, it's the process that the council does in advance of the work of the Development Review Board. Is that correct? Would you say that?
It's just that there's a longer, there's a longer appeal period with the annexations and zone map amendments than there is with the Development Review Board. So we're talking 2 weeks versus a month. So, and we also have to do first reading and second reading on annexation and zone map amendment. So if they're able to get that taken care of while they're headed to DRB, then there's there's more, it coincides better when we finally get through DRB that, oh, okay, there's 2 weeks and they've already in the appeal period for council. So that's been in all 4 projects that we have all used that. And like I said, it has been much appreciated that they're able to do that and get a jump start. The hang up with sometimes is that if they go to council first, they have to, that annexation and zone map amendment cannot become effective until they've had their stage 2 final plan approved by DRB. So there's a little bit of a hitch there, but for all of them, they've made it through. It's been quicker for them to do it that way. Thank you. Yes.
Council President Ackerval.
Shoot, I'll ask this quick. And I understand that some of the meat of this discussion will be things that we will do in the coming months, and I appreciate that. I guess one question that I don't expect for you to answer tonight, but maybe as we move forward in those coming months, I'm curious if are other areas seeing the type of development that we've defined in our code? Like, is it happening other places, or have we defined something that nobody's building yet? That we're too far ahead of ourselves. We're envisioning something that like nobody's doing yet. I guess that would be one of my questions is it a matter of us tightening up kind of our code or our definition, or are we trying to describe something that's not that's just not happening yet? And then do we think it will happen? And will it happen in the next 5 years, the next 10 years, or what, I guess I would hope that maybe we can explore that.
Yeah. Very good questions, Councilor Ackerval. And I guess I would say that the Precision Countertops project, which only required one waiver,
Okay.
which is more of a corporate headquarters. They have showroom, they have some retail, they have office, they have manufacturing and assembly, was of the 4 projects, probably the closest to what has been envisioned for Coffee Creek. Whether we will get more of that in the future, who knows? That's a crystal ball that I don't have. But the other projects have been all like larger warehousing and distribution projects, which are not, and they've required many, many waivers.
Right.
So hard to say. But we want to find that balance between, how can we make it possible for projects to, like a Precision Countertops, to locate out there, while still making it maybe a bit easier for those larger projects to maybe not request as many waivers. So it's finding that balance.
Thank you. I see we have our planning director.
Thank you, Mayor and council members. Cindy, Ms. Luxoy just gave a great response to that question in terms of different types of development that could go in this area. I just would add slightly to Council President Ackerval's question, which is that when the city went through this process to establish a form-based code for industrial area, it was the first of its kind that we were aware of. So in terms of were we on the cutting edge? Yes. I'm still not aware of another industrial area using a form-based code. And so it is possible that we adopted some standards a bit too aggressively for what we consider to be a light industrial area. This is a regionally significant industrial area on Metro's map on Title IV. It's really important that we get jobs in this area and great industrial development. A lot of the standards were driven by the desire for us to have a multimodal network to support that industrial area as well. So if people are walking or biking or taking the bus to work, like it's really a system for all. So it is possible that we didn't get the standards perfectly right the first time. And so I think one of the questions we'll be asking during this process is ensuring we adhere to those tenets, that vision that we had for the area, but looking at standards where maybe there's another way to meet them. And one of the things we've learned through the waiver is if they get a waiver, they're still required to show how they meet the intent of the design standards. And so there is a process by which we go through. So for example, on some of the projects where they put a little bit more parking spaces on the frontage street, we required additional screening. So there's also ways in which we could potentially change the code where we create kind of like, if you can't exactly meet the existing code standard, here are things you could do. And if you do these things, then you can get essentially an administrative waiver through the Class 2 process, versus if you want to go then above this other performance, you'd have to go in front of the DRB. So we have different options for how we pursue this, but to some degree, yes, we are on the cutting edge. We were when we adopted this. We may not have gotten it quite right, and so this is an opportunity for us to relook at it and make tweaks where we think it would benefit.
Excellent. Thank you.
I like the idea of having that administrative waiver where you can work with the applicant internally before it has to go to a larger, bigger decision.
Thank you. Looks like a lot more, more work on that one too. We've got our work cut out for us. Thank you very much. And that brings us to our next item on the work session, which is our, just a minute here, proposal to update solid waste franchise agreement and related administrative rules. We had a big packet on that, so let's see how far we can get.
Thank you, Mayor and Councilors. Amanda Guile-Hinman, City Attorney. I'm also here with Assistant City Attorney Stephanie Davidson, who's pulling up the PowerPoint. We also have representatives from Republic Services here tonight. We have Travis and Matt, who are sitting just behind me. It's a little atypical for us to do this in a work session, but given that this has been a really collaborative effort to address some of the issues that we have identified in our franchise agreement and our administrative rules, there will come a point in time, assuming we have time, where I'm going to ask either one of them to come up and speak on a couple of issues that we've identified, just so council can understand Republic Services' perspective and we're not speaking for them. So, tonight we're here to talk about updates to the solid waste franchise agreement. An outline for tonight, so as you see, we've got 2 points. Time permitting, we'll get to point number 2. If we don't get to it, that's fine. We can put it on our next work session. As a precursor for another slide that's coming up, we've got another work session where we will specifically focus on updates to the administrative rules. So that preview is really to give you some of the policies that are coming into play that affect those administrative rules. So if we don't get them to them tonight, we'll hit them at the next work session. So I'm going to start talking about the background because I was the person who got to work on the project when we did the major overhaul of the franchise agreement back in 2017 and 2018. So as a way of background, our franchise agreement is really regulated by state, regional, and then our local code. So there are some goalposts that we have to operate within when we talk about our franchise agreement. So first off is that state statutes state that our local code and our ordinances cannot conflict with state or metro solid waste management regulations. So some of the updates that we're going to be talking about both in the franchise agreement and the administrative rules are in response to some updates that are happening on the state or regional level. The state in 1983 passed the Recycling Opportunities Act. That's when the opportunity to recycle really became mandated. It was further refined in 1991 through the Oregon Recycling Act, which focused on the entire recycling process, not just collection. And then finally, for our local code, we have Wilsonville Code 8.005 that basically says that anything regarding solid waste, recycling, and related services, the collection and hauling of that, is going to be done by ordinance. So that's why you see our franchise agreement is an ordinance that we adopt. In 2017, the council, in addition to its council goals, had administrative initiatives. One of those was to update our franchise agreement. And so in 2017 and 2018, the staff and Republic Services looked at overhauling our franchise agreement. It had not been updated since 1982, so it was over 30 years old at that point and really required a major overhaul. So we did that. We did also another update to the administrative rules in 2019 in response to Metro's commercial food waste program, which at that time was sort of voluntary and then was going to be phased into a mandatory process. COVID sort of threw that out the window, and it's been revised, which we're addressing as part of this. And so we looked at those, and then finally we looked at our current franchise agreement, what's working, what's not working, to take the opportunity to address those as we address these new state and metro regulations that are coming into play.
So in the staff report we provided, we wanted to provide a breakdown of sort of the subject matter of the franchise agreement and the subject matter of the administrative rules. Those two documents work together, but we wanted to make sure that they made sense. This is essentially a duplicate list of what we have in the staff report, so I'll go over it really quickly since we're short on time. But the way I see it, the franchise agreement is really the high level, like what is the relationship like between the city and Republic Services? What are the parties' respective obligations? What is the scope of the franchise? Things like that. So this and the next slide are probably the more important points in this conversation tonight. We wanted to go over some of the key updates. If you look at the first attachment to the staff report, you will see the full red line of the franchise agreement, which contains a number of changes. Some of the changes are less important, more like tidying up the language. The points that you'll see on the screen are what I view as like bigger changes that we're proposing. So the definitions have been updated updated. In particular, we wanted to look at both the franchise agreement and the administrative rules, make sure all of the definitions were consistently defined between the two documents. We don't want conflicting definitions or definitions that don't match. We did want to point out that this one change that's highlighted here, the addition of certain charitable expenses that are approved by the city being carved out of the definition of unallowable expenses. That's, new change that's being proposed this time around.
The second change, that's one of the ones that we wanted to highlight, was about amending the service rates that customers pay by resolution. You all already do that. It's implied in the franchise agreement, but it's not explicit, so we figured we should make it explicit since we're going through the process.
The third point here is why a number of the changes in the document are being proposed. You'll see throughout the document where currently we're referring to fiscal year, we're proposing a shift to the calendar year. There's a few reasons to do that. It's what the county does. It's actually what we're doing in practice right now, despite what's in the franchise agreement. From a customer's point of view, most people think in terms of the calendar year, so it makes more sense to a customer for new rates and, changes like this to take effect as of January 1st versus July 1st. What else? So that's a number of the changes you'll see in the document. There is a point in the document, too, where we're shifting some dates, and that's related to that same change. And finally, we've added some language to the annual reporting requirement relating to Metro's food waste program. In particular, I think that the city has a reporting requirement, so we're going to ask Republic Services for some information about the number of rejected loads. So like if a customer is required to participate in the food waste program, but they have a contaminated load, that probably needs to go into the normal waste stream rather than, being taken in through the food waste program. And then also the number of fees, total fees assessed in the compliance program. Is there anything else you would add? So these are the three, we're proposing a number of changes to the franchise agreement, but these were the three big policy questions that we identified. The first is what I just alluded to. Do you agree, should the city shift from a fiscal year basis to a calendar year basis? Do you want to go through all of them?
Yeah, let's go through all of them because really Republic Services is going to talk about items 2 and 3, or council permitting is going to talk about items 2 and 3.
And we're not voting right now.
Correct.
Well, regarding the first question, do you want to ask for a thumbs up?
Sure. I mean, does anyone see an issue, I guess, with the fiscal year, changing from fiscal year to calendar year?
It works fine with our city, right?
Correct, yep. We get paid quarterly a franchise fee, and that's really what is, as far as the budget is concerned, that franchise fee is what we project out. And so the franchise fee is, since we get paid quarterly and it's not a huge amount of money, it's not going to be significant as far as budget considerations.
It seems like it would simplify the reporting for us to make it calendar year.
Mm-hmm.
For whatever it's worth, I think.
Simplify it for our consumers, right? I mean, isn't that what you said, that it was to make it easier for our consumers to understand?
Right. And like Stephanie said, it's what we're already doing in practice anyway, so it's more aligning with what we're currently doing.
I think also the fact that Clackamas County is on the same schedule, it makes Republic Services' life a little easier. The reporting's on the same cycle, and the two reporting systems sync up with each other.
Okay, so for items 2 and 3, we somewhat previewed this in the staff report about the electric vehicle acquisition as an allowable expense, and then the biannual report. Particularly about electric vehicles, I'll just note before Republic Services comes up, is that there's language in the franchise agreement about unallowable expenses being pilot programs and basically new technologies. And what I think Republic Services will comment on is electric vehicle rollout just generally speaking, is occurring. Republic Services is already rolling out electric vehicles, and so the question becomes, at what point in time is that considered a pilot program or a new technology versus their standard fleet, and thus then being considered an allowable expense. So I'll defer to them to comment further to the extent they do.
Are we going to hear from Republic Services now? Okay.
We figured instead of making them wait until
They're
community
already
comment, it'd just be easier.
I think Councilor Linville has a question.
Well, I'm wondering why we're isolating them when we're not talking about other alternative fuels, which we are using as a city as well.
Yeah, so in the current franchise agreement, it's expressly calls out electric vehicles. And so I think, and Republic Services is rolling out, well, you can speak to what you're rolling out.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm Travis Comfort. Many of you might remember me from last year. I don't live in the city, but if you want my address, I can give you my address as well. So in terms of EVs, we are planning on rolling them out. We will be breaking ground in Q1 of next year, so hopefully we'll get you around for some tours. We're looking at 2 to 4 trucks hopefully next year. They are specifically limited to recycling based on the hydraulic power lift and then the loads that the trucks can carry. In terms of having it in the franchise, cities like Lake Oswego, Washington County, other areas are asking to go greener. We're already using renewable natural gas for the fleet servicing Wilsonville, so they are using that renewable source. So it's totally up to the city. It's just a trend that we're seeing the industry take. The average truck is currently about $1 million. It was about $1.2 million a year and a half ago. So the prices are coming down on those, but a new RNG truck is about $500,000. The maintenance cost is higher on the RNG than on the electric trucks, so you will see some of those buckets of expenses shift from columns. But yeah, we're hopeful.
Was the exclusion to the electric vehicles one of the, how far back does that go?
2018 to 2019 when it was adopted.
Okay.
And it's the only, we service 16 franchises, it's the only franchise that references emerging technologies.
I will also note at the time, since I was involved in those conversations, at the time, that was also when WRI, which is the transfer station, was looking at an anaerobic digester. And then there was this question too about, okay, if that's used by WRI and WRI puts that cost on Republic Services, how does that all get calculated out? And so I think we just didn't know, and we didn't want that to be necessarily the brunt of that cost being put on our customers being located here.
Yeah. Are you taking comments?
Sure. So does anyone object to allowing the inclusion of electric vehicles as an allowable expense? Councilor Ackervall, Councilor.
Thank you. I don't know that I object, but I do have a question about that. Because I think I understood you to say, and of course, I mean, I think from my view, I would welcome that we move to a renewable energy source, right? But my thought is, if these trucks are much more expensive, will it change the calculation for the operating margin and then therefore change the rates for our customers and our community member? And are they prepared to pay, like how big of a change would that be? And, because I think as a council, we try to have consistent, stable rates for our customers. Yeah, try to manage it, and we, do small movements here instead of, having a large change that can be very difficult for some of our customers. And of course, businesses plan investments in their technology and in their company, oftentimes years in advance. But our customers that are paying their garbage bill, they might not be thinking that they need to save up for that larger bill that's coming because we have an investment in technology. So I'm just curious, how might these changes affect the prices for our customers.
Of course, there will be a nominal increase, but we do have a full team working on grants and incentives. PGE, there are other companies offering incentives for us to move to a greener fleet. There are federal subsidies also. So we are looking at ways of like mitigating the overall cost. But it would still be a fraction of the hauling division. So just like we go through with the county and Chris Bell and Mark on your staff, it would be still very proportional to the actual truck hours in your city.
Do we have information from some of the other communities that just could, I guess before I'm like, yeah, this is great. I'd like to know what the impact might be for people in Wilsonville.
Yeah, and we can definitely provide that when we come back, for sure.
That'd be excellent. Thank you. Yeah.
And just since we've got 1 minute left, I think particularly about the biannual report, because that was something specifically requested by Public Services. Travis, if you want to touch on the biannual report.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much time you guys spend on reviewing our reports, but the way our reporting structure is, we do 2 biannual reports and 1 annual report. The annual report comes at the same time as the second biannual report for the year. And the reason why that happens is because we're through with the county and the accountant to go through absolutely everything, and that's when the data is available. So the biannual reports, they take as much time as the annual report to put together, but they don't have any outside audit or review, and they don't have financial data, and they aren't consistent with what the annual report winds up showing. So it's not data that you should be making decisions on. So that's why we wanted to ask council, like, is there certain things that are helpful, like mid-year or like part of the ways through the year that we could try to provide? But the way it's set up now, it's just not valid data to be making decisions on.
Well, one thing that occurs to me, I mean, we have looked at ways to manage these costs for years and years, and are bothered by some of the built-in increases. At least, I mean, I know I am. I think just about anybody is. And we did correct something years ago where the people who generated the least amount of garbage are now not paying the highest rate per cubic foot. That was the case a long time ago. But maybe the reason we have this extra report, I don't know, it could have been because we just wanted a heads up on things that are changing so that we're not surprised.
Yeah.
And then this comment about the electric vehicle sounds good. We don't want to be surprised by some big cost. I don't know when you need new trucks, these kinds of things. So, and if doing this extra report causes you to spend more, make things more costly, that's not helping.
And to caveat on that, kind of in the near future, with the Recycling Modernization Act and other things that we're working on with your city, we will definitely be coming back more frequently to inform the council of that and the new projects that we're hoping to bring to Wilsonville through that program. And with the reporting, the annual rate adjustment, we're hoping to not only have like an annual update, but also that review process. So maybe we could also stagger those throughout the year and provide council that.
Perhaps at that review process, should we write something into the agreement that says we want to know of any anticipated cost increases that emerged for some unknown reason?
Or situations that might impact that ratio.
Of course, and like we were saying, we're hoping to get 2 trucks next year. The backlog on trucks right now is about a year, maybe a little bit longer. So the supply chain issue in terms of making new hauling trucks is still very slow to recover after the pandemic. So we're hopeful to get 2 next year. It still could be a slow rollout as well.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like what I'm hearing from council is we can come back with some more information from our public services on data about cost increases, and maybe specifically, I know Boise did a pretty big rollout.
Yeah, we can bring out more stuff on the EVs, for sure.
And then what we can do as well is look at maybe bifurcating the information that's in the annual report into a review at one point in time, and then the actual rate review at the calendar year point of time. So we can look at the language to tweak that. And I'll just note, I know we're over time. At the time that we were talking about these reports, there's a lot of information in I think it's in the biannual report, maybe the annual report as well, about customer complaints. That was a pretty big concern of the council at the time. Now, through the complaint reporting process, city staff are alerted, get that email that Republic Services we get that at the same time. So we're alerted immediately when there's a customer complaint issue through that online system. So as far as staff being aware and then communicating with Republic Services about the issue, that happens in real time versus, needing to come look at something 6 months after the fact.
So those have also gone down over the 4 years I've been here.
So it looks like are we about ready to close this for today? And then when would we take it up again, our next part of this?
So can you go to the slide on the schedule? So we'll come back at the next meeting just to preview the policies that are going to impact the administrative rules. We're going to come back with draft updates to the administrative rules on October 16th. And then we'll be looking at November for adoption of an updated ordinance so it can go into effect January 1. Which should hopefully be syncing up with our rate review as well.
So could I just quickly ask, on page, it's 87 of our packet. I hate to be wordsmithing you, but we've got 2 manures in there. One in the first, do you see that's?
It's in the draft franchise.
It's in the draft. It's the top of the page is called item D. It's page 9 of 34 of the ordinance. And it's in that number 34.
Oh, yep, I see.
You got two manures in there.
We just wanted to be doubly sure.
I know. And then
Be careful with waste.
Yeah. And then the other thing I wondered about is the addition of sod and dirt to the yard debris.
Yeah, I don't know if you or Matt want to comment on that issue, on the sod issue.
Again, it's a weight issue in terms of the mechanical arm. If you fill your, 65 or 95 gallon roll cart full of sod or dirt, it could break the arm. So it's just a weight factor.
And my understanding as well is that I could be totally wrong, I'm not the expert, but I think I remember a comment, something about that now that all of that is going, these items are going into an organic materials disposal route that it messes with the pH. Am I saying that correctly?
Yeah, a lot of that stuff can't go to the organic composters. So all of your food and yard debris currently goes to PRC down in Corvallis, and all of that's used for organic level compost.
The only reason I'm asking is that there's periodically small amounts of dirt that I've heard, people empty a
Like if you pull your
can,
pot and throw it in there, that's fine.
Or whatever.
Yeah.
But people, when they see that, they go, oh, we're not allowed to put any dirt. And I've had people complain to me about that. Is it true? We're not supposed to put any dirt in our yard debris containers? And I'm like,
Around potted roots that's not the concern.
Yeah.
That's not the concern.
I wonder if that could be clarified in this,
We
where
can
it
work
talks
on
about large amounts or not to exceed 2 gallons or not, whatever, so that, there's some clarification.
So we can work on that
for sure.
Okay, so thank you very much. I'm going to close our work session, and we will reconvene in, what do you need, 7 minutes?
Less now.
But why don't we reconvene at 7:15? Call to order a meeting of the Wilsonville City Council on Monday, September 18th at 7:17 p.m. and ask the city recorder to call the roll.
Counselor Berry.
Present.
Counselor Linville.
Here.
Council President Ockervall. Here. Counselor Dunwell.
Here.
Mayor Fitzgerald.
Here. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Do I have a motion to approve the following order of agenda?
Your Honor, I move to approve the following order of agenda.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Motion's been moved and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0. Sorry that we start a little bit late. I will make my mayor's comments brief. With Labor Day and other holidays coming up, hope everybody had a good break and a change in the weather. I also wanted to call attention to 3 holidays or days of celebration coming up that our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee has called out as significant for the community, and that is part of the calendar that the council approved earlier. But upcoming dates include Rosh Hashanah, September 15th to 17th, Yom Kippur on September 24th, and Hispanic Heritage Month, September 15th through October 15th. And there is a special event coming up at the Wilsonville Public Library that is put together by the DEI Committee and the library, Hispanic Heritage Month Family Movie Matinee, and it's October 14th at 3:30 p.m. in the Oak Room at the library. All of our counselors on the Wilsonville City Council take some assignments and areas of focus so that we can all take care of some of the work representing our city and our region. And over time, some of those change, have increasing demands, and we want to make sure we have enough people covering all of those. And so we've made it, I wanted to announce that I would like to note a change in the representative for the Washington County Coordinating Committee, also known as WCCC. I had done that lead role for a little while, and then I asked Council President Ockervall to do it because I had a conflict at that time, but I would like to now ask Councilor Dunwell, or appoint Councilor Dunwell to be that lead for us on that committee. And what they discuss in that committee is long and short-term land use and transportation issues for cities in Washington County, and because we are in Washington and Clackamas County, we have quite a few meetings to go to. So I will continue to serve as the city's alternate on that committee. Thank you, Councilor Dunwell. We had a great August celebration with the city, and a lot of residents came to that in our party in the park. We used to call it the community block party, and I think we had the greatest attendance we've ever had there. Lots of booths, lots of fun things and food. I wanted to thank the city staff for all their work and all that you did to pull all of that together. Even included a bicycle repair workshop by our transit community, SMART. They had all kinds of things. And the other counselors may comment on that. This is a time that I also report on meetings I've gone to, and you'll hear about the same from other counselors. One of the groups that we have always had a participation is the Clackamas County Business Alliance, and that's a chance to hear about things that are going on in Clackamas County regarding economic development and so forth. And recently on first week of September, they had a reception for Congresswoman Chavez DeReamer to hear from her, and she is the representative of the 5th Congressional District. She's the former mayor of Happy Valley. So she talked about some of her experience as a freshman representative, and I wanted to add that she did, pertinent to Wilsonville, she did talk about the expansion and tolling of the I-205, which is of interest to us, and the repair of the Willamette River Lock. So she's really interested in that. We had a meeting of the Clackamas version of this WCCC that I just described that Councilor Dunwell is going to sit on, so it's called C4, and Councilor Berry was at that one too. But we heard one of the speakers at that meeting was Governor Kotek's new Regional Solutions Director, Amelia Porterfield. And she offered to meet with cities and get to know them and their interests. And I'm glad to say that we have wanted to meet with this representative for quite a long time, and I'm glad to say that she responded to my request to meet, and we will be having a meeting later in the month. And we'll be discussing some of the topics that Wilsonville has worked on for a long time, one of them being the Aurora Airport, and ask her to just be one of our partners in helping us work out good solutions to problems like that as we move forward. Also at the C4 meeting, we discussed ODOT's I-5 and I-205 regional tolling project, and the most recent thing there is ODOT asked all of the cities to submit a list of nexus projects that they called them, which would be between highway tolling and local traffic diversion impacts. And it was a very short time frame. All the cities produced, I think almost every city added projects. They were not prioritized. It was a long process, a long list of very expensive traffic mitigation and enhancement projects, basically. So any that the city of Wilsonville listed were already in our transportation system plan, so we did not add anything new, but we just reinforced what's important to Wilsonville. If they do add funding to fund some of those, perhaps that will, we don't know if they will, but that could be a source of funding. I think we'll believe that when we see it. It looks like a really complicated project list. Upcoming meetings, I'm going to another Clackamas County Business Alliance meeting coming up soon, and a Metropolitan Mayor's Consortium meeting. I also attended a meeting put together by Clackamas County Commissioners that was a regional addiction recovery summit. It was on September 14th for half a day, and they had quite a few people from around the county at the meeting and had invited people who have worked on regional solutions, communities working together to increase resources for persons needing recovery from addiction. So it was a really interesting meeting, and I think we'll hear more from Clackamas County about what they are offering there. But they had some good speakers from the county health department and from outside of Oregon as well. The next city council meeting will be October 2nd, starting at 7 p.m. And at this time, we're ready for our communications section of our agenda, and we will hear from our staff about the Mediterranean oak borer problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mayor Fitzgerald, members of the council. I'm the city's Community Development Director, Chris Namsu. I'm sorry that we're here tonight under such an awful topic. We're talking to you tonight about the presence of Mediterranean oak borer in our precious Oregon white oak landscape across the city. I'm joined this evening by several folks. I've got Georgia McAllister, who's an associate planner with the city. I also have Morgan Holen, who is the city's consulting arborist. Morgan is a Wilsonville resident and represents about 95% of the tree work we do. She is our local go-to specialist regarding arboriculture across the landscape, and Morgan is top shelf as far as consulting arborists go in the field. To Morgan's right is Lyle Failmeyer with Bartlett Tree Experts. Bartlett are the foremost consulting company. They do everything from consulting to applying the chemicals that are needed to treat our Oregon white oak trees. And I brought them tonight to augment Georgia and my rapidly evolving knowledge around this particular bug and what's been happening in our community. We're quite alarmed. We're here tonight to bring you up to speed on the evolving situation regarding Mediterranean oak borer. We're going to preface tonight's presentation with the caveat that there's far more that we do not know at this time than what we do know. We are learning things every single day. We're discovering things. We're making observations. We're collecting information. And we've got a very robust treatment program that we've already initiated, and Georgia will cover that as part of her presentation this evening. I just brought the experts because there's so many questions. We may need to follow, based on your questions this evening, we may need to follow up with you as far as answers. I did bring Georgia and brought Morgan and Lyle in hopes that we could answer your questions this evening, but the fact of the matter remains, the body of science around this particular insect and its presence in Oregon is literally non-existent. We find ourselves, unfortunately, at the forefront of this slow-moving tragedy. On Friday, our staff report, Georgia and my staff report was distributed to the City Council via an addendum to the staff report. And that staff report really contains the most accurate timeline, as well as all of the frequently asked questions that have been produced by the Oregon Department of Agriculture and the Oregon Department of Forestry, as well as some interim guidance that was provided regarding the disposal of wood and how to react to the observations in the field. And that's all very recent information that has been provided. Today, the city issued a press release on the topic, and within an hour following our press release, the Oregon Department of Agriculture and the Oregon Department of Forestry released a joint press release. So the public information campaign in Oregon in the Willamette Valley has officially begun as of tonight, as of the release of this press release. And we're hopeful that the spokesman will help us get this on the front page and start getting word out to our community regarding the signs and symptoms of what a declining Oregon white oak looks like. So I'm going to stop there and turn the presentation. It's a short presentation. We only have several slides. Georgia's going to go through a little bit of background, show you some pictures. And again, Morgan and Lyle are here as far as our technical experts. And we'll do our best to respond. If the council has any questions to start, now would be a good time to ask anything that you would like. And if there aren't questions, we'll go straight into the presentation.
So it sounds like right now the bug is just for that one type of tree, right? In Wilsonville? Or is it all sorts of oaks, or is it just the white oak?
So the guidance from the state in the frequently asked question sheet, you will see that there is a broader potential exposure to other trees. The genus Quercus is the oak genus. So we have dozens of oak species in our landscape. Red oak, pin oak, charbonneau has 815 red oaks that line French Prairie Drive. It's expected that this MOB bug likes oak, likes the full variety of oak species. It's suspected that other species within the plant family, which is a larger plant family that includes many other genuses, things like elm. I'd have to look at the exact reference in the frequently asked sheet here, unless my experts know off the top of their head. I think it was elm.
Yeah, there's about 300 species that can be attacked with this type of beetle.
Other questions before we start the slideshow?
One question, super quick question. Before you get started, can you give us a census of how many trees could be impacted by this within our city?
How many trees are impacted by this?
Could be.
Could be, all of them. We've collected a lot of information as far as starting a spreadsheet, all the development sites where we have arborist reports, where we have listed tree numbers. We started compiling all of that into a large database. It's our observation that the older trees, especially where there might have been some ice damage or some breakage, those are the ones that appear, the big trees that are stressing. Those are the ones that we're seeing a lot of this in. We're not seeing it in the smaller trees, and I'm happy to be corrected at any point by Lyle and Morgan with their observations, because they're out in the field really looking at this every single minute of every day now. And so why don't I just not talk anymore and turn it over to you guys? So, because I'll do my best, but I have the experts.
You're doing great. It's been my experience over the last several weeks that it's only been symptoms and signs of Mediterranean oak borer have been observed in mature Oregon white oaks, most of which, or all of which, have been stressed in some way or another, either through drought stress or ice storm damage, or had substantial defects already. And my observations have been limited to those mature Oregon white oaks at this time.
I'll add to that we have another invasive insect that are hitting the leaves of the oak tree called an oak lacebug that have, if you noticed last year, that the green trees kind of look like a hazy brown coming this time of the year. And so there's a small sucking insect that sucks the chlorophyll out of the leaf, lessening the availability to transfer light into energy so it's weakening the trees, the drought, the lack of rain, the unseasonal rain and such. So the trees are in a semi-stressed state already. And so this insect is, I think, just taking advantage. It may have been here for a while. It's just being exposed because of the current temperatures and lack of rain.
And I'll just add that since it is an invasive pest, our natives tend to be more susceptible for that reason and are targeted for that reason.
Thank you. Before you get started or go further, could each of you please introduce your names? Because we heard the list, but I think for each person to introduce themselves would be wonderful. Thank you.
I'm Georgia McAllister. I'm one of the associate planners with the city.
I'm Morgan Holen, private consulting arborist on contract with the city and a Wilsonville resident.
I am Lyle Fellmeyer. I'm a commercial arborist, board certified master arborist for the Willamette Valley.
Thank you.
And work for Bartlett Tree Experts.
And the DOA flyer says it's found to attack many species, including elm, maple, walnut, and others. All right, Georgia.
Right. Well, thank you all, and thank you, Chris, for the introduction today. Of course, it's not an exciting topic we're talking about. It's rather sad, but very happy to be here with you tonight to speak about it. As you're aware, white oaks in Wilsonville are very important trees to our community. They're environmentally significant and they are culturally significant. And for that reason, as we've developed as a city, they have been incorporated throughout. We have preserved our Oregon white oak trees along road projects that we've been doing throughout Villebois, Frog Pond, our commercial developments, our industrial developments. We have several groves within the city that have been preserved and protected over the years. We have an amazing number of white oak trees for a city as developed and as old as we are. And because we have put so much effort into preserving these priority trees, we have a lot of vulnerable trees. We have a lot of really old white oak trees. It's absolutely amazing we have all of those, and I just wanted to highlight that quickly as we started to talk through this today, calling out some of our really important ones. Two of our heritage trees are white oak trees, so tied really deeply into our history and the development of Wilsonville. One of those is located at Wilsonville High School. It's very prominent there. The school district and school have invested quite a lot of time and money into maintaining that tree as it is so significant, including cabling of the tree, other types of treatments to just keep it going strong. And as it is right now, it is happy and healthy. But there has been damage over the years. And as I mentioned before, we've retain them throughout the development of many different subdivisions. And then we're also adjacent to Graham Oaks Nature Park. Doesn't even really feel separate from Wilsonville, although it is technically not within Wilsonville. But we have this one oak tree I have on the slide right there is that Graham Oak tree. It's very significant beyond just the city of Wilsonville. It's for the region, and many people think of that as the oak tree when they think of Wilsonville. So there's a lot for us to be protective of. There's a lot for us to think about as we move forward as a city with the Mediterranean oak borer and what those potential consequences are. Because as we mentioned, the more vulnerable trees are our older trees and trees that have seen damage throughout the year. And those are also a lot of our more special white oak trees in town. So we talked about this a little bit, but what is our Mediterranean oak borer? It's an invasive beetle that has come over. It appears to be from Germany in some method. They say they can come in oak barrels for wine. There's many different ways they could have come over. But like we mentioned, they target several different types of trees. I think our most concerning one is the white oak trees because we, one, have already seen an infestation at this point, and they are significant in a different way than some of the other trees. They're very small bugs, not something most people would necessarily notice, smaller than a grain of rice, but they do a lot of damage, and they do it very impressively. So why are they a threat to our Oregon white oaks? They actually farm fungus inside of the trees. This is to feed their larvae and keep them going so that they can multiply and go out and find a new tree to then farm. They enter through the canopy of the tree, so they start at the top and work their way down so that they can use as much nutrients as possible and keep the tree alive, essentially, as they are farming it. And so when we talk about those signs and symptoms of the MOB, some of those first symptoms are thinning of the crown of the tree, because that's where the nutrients are first being drained. You see an individual large scaffolding branch. Suddenly, all of the leaves are somewhat of a rust color. So this would look different than what Lyle was explaining before about some of the trees starting to look dusty. It's a very stark individual branch, and you're seeing that patch of brown or rust color. There's also presence of frass, and frass is a new thing that I've learned about, but frass is essentially the waste of the borer, so it's basically like sawdust or sand is what it looks like, and that accumulates at the base of the tree or on the branches of the tree, and we've seen that in a few different trees around. And then, of course, there's small borer hole entry and exit points. Those are harder to see, and there's a lot of different types of boring creatures, so not necessarily Mediterranean oak borer just because of that. But those really stark signs are one individual scaffolding branch going, and then the decline within the canopy. And we have some examples of that, unfortunately, in Wilsonville right now. So Mediterranean oak borer has been present in Oregon since around 2017, 2018, but it was understood to not be prevalent and really impacting trees yet. They had not been found within any tree. But August of 2022, we noticed that the Oregon white oak that is along Kinsman and Wilsonville Road, where there's a major construction project going on now, was in decline. And it was concerning since we had done, arborist reports on this tree, looked at the health of it, put a lot of work to make sure that that road construction we were going to be doing would keep this tree alive. I mean, boring 20 feet underneath the root ball of the tree. And then we started to see this decline, and it was concerning. And at that time, I know Morgan actually went out and looked at the tree, and there was a question, could this be Mediterranean oak borer? But since it was not something prominent within the state yet, and not something that our experts at the state were necessarily tracking, essentially believed it was not caused from that. It was a combination of potentially the heat, the ice, the other insects we have going on, and it's just a conglomeration of all of that, and not necessarily the MOB. And that was the conclusive at that time. We did call an ODF to look at it, and that was the thought. And then in June of 2023, we came back and took a look at the tree. And as you can see here, it declined incredibly rapidly. So in less than a year, we're looking at a tree that essentially needs to come out. That's not a tree that can necessarily be saved. And if you go look at it today, it looks worse today than it did in June. And so this really put our alarm bells on as the city itself, just worrying about our white oak trees and what may be happening. Chris and I did a drive around the city to check in on those other prominent oaks that we had retained over the years to see what they were looking like, and started to notice a really concerning pattern where we were noticing thinning in the crown, specific branches having dieback, and just trees that looked great a few months ago really not looking well. So we kind of went into hyperdrive at that moment, assembled a team between different departments to talk about how are we going to investigate the health of the trees and what are we going to do about the health of our oak trees. And as we were doing that, as I mentioned before, we retain these during development, and so we had at Frog Pond Estates, or what's going to be Frog Pond Estates, there was a oak tree that was retained as a part of that development because it was such a high quality tree. And that really is part of what we do, is we look and see what is the best tree, because we design subdivisions around it. It better be a great tree that you're going to be keeping there. And one of our planners went out to do an inspection of the tree fencing for the preservation, and noticed the tree was dying. And when they submitted for that subdivision, that tree was of such high quality, we were retaining it and we were building a subdivision around it. And we had to take that tree down. We did an emergency tree removal. And this was the moment that I think we all really felt, wow, I think we have Mediterranean oak borer here in the city. And so what you're looking at here is some of the debris from that tree, as well as a tree nearby, also in Frog Pond, that we believe could potentially have MOB. We, on September 8th, had representatives from the Oregon Department of Agriculture, Oregon Department of Forestry, and Metro come out with us to the tree on site. We had previously, Lyle and his team had previously taken samples from the tree and sent it to their lab in North Carolina that confirmed that it was Mediterranean oak borer. At that time, we wanted confirmation from our state agencies as well. We wanted to bring them into the conversation. So we had them come out with us on September 8th. They took some more samples, spent a lot of time at this tree, and they did confirm that there was Mediterranean oak borer present at that site. They confirmed that they thought it was at several trees around that site that have not yet come down, but you can observe them over in the Frog Pond area. And then we went to the West Station Oak Grove we have there, a mitigation site. And those were trees that appeared to be quite healthy. And so, but they were damaged significantly in the ice storm. So we took the team over there to take a look, and what they found was frass. You can see that in the picture of the bark. That's what frass looks like. And we found that in the base of some of the trees, and they did collect a live specimen from that site. So we found that there was Mediterranean oak borer also present at the West Station. So what we believe as a city is that we may have had Mediterranean oak borer present for several years, that they've been building up their load within the trees, and once we start to see the symptoms, it's a fairly quick decline because the load is so high at that point. Of course, like Chris said, we don't know, we don't have much science behind all of this. Some of this is conjecture, but that appears to be the pattern that we're seeing, and ODA, ODF felt that that made sense. We were also told that ODA did find a Mediterranean oak borer in a trap last year. It was not something that we were informed about, but it was present then in 2022 along I-5 within Wilsonville. So, like I said, the unknown. There's a lot we don't know here. It's not entirely clear how effective the treatment that we will be using is. There's a fungicide and pesticide element that are injected within the tree, contained within the tree. It is used on ambrosia beetles of a slightly different kind, not specifically the Mediterranean oak borer, but still an ambrosia beetle, which the Mediterranean oak borer is. It's not entirely clear to us how it will impact our younger oak trees, since I don't feel that we have found presence in any of those younger trees yet, but we have observed that it appears that MOB targets are older trees that are struggling in other ways. We don't have a clear path for how to dispose of the tree. You don't often, these invasive pests, they move around in wood. You know, people take a tree down, they cut it up, and they take it camping somewhere, or they bring it to another location to sell. I mean, there's many different ways it can travel. That's often how this larva gets from one location to another location within a state and within the country. And so when the tree comes down, we want to know what to do with all of that wood. And unfortunately, we still have that one tree in a pile in Frog Pond because it's not entirely clear. Some of the recommendations are burning. That's a really big undertaking for us. We're coordinating currently with ODA on trying to get a curtain burner, which would be located on a site owned by the city to take care of those trees, but there's quite a bit of work to put in to get there. Like we said, it's not clear how long it's been here, how we may be able to keep it contained, if we can keep it contained. I think that's the ultimate goal, is to try and keep it from the rest of the state if possible. And then how we know that a lot of this treatment is effective as a preventative treatment. So a tree that is doing well, you inject it prior to it being infested, and that can stop the infestation. What's not so clear is what happens if a tree is currently infested. Can you bring that tree back? And can you lower the population of the pest within that tree? So we have begun on an action plan. So far, we have assembled a working group within the city, within Public Works, Parks and Recreation, the community development team, natural resources, figuring out how we want to act in order to preserve our trees. We've notified the important agencies to be in the conversation with us, because we want to make sure that we're acting in this, in harmony with them. We've inventoried the health of many of our Oregon white oaks within the city. We did some drone shots to see the groves that I mentioned prior and see if we notice anything off within our groves. We created a list of what we were calling the priority oak trees. And so that list was based off of some of the things I mentioned before, which is, time invested into them, cultural significance, were they preserved, are they a very large, prominent tree? We did begin treating those trees already. Right now, we're in the progress of doing some of that treatment. We've done at least 30 within the city. We are going to stop off at those priority trees at this time because there's a limited time for treatment. And we are developing a plan for what we want to do this coming year and in the spring with our other trees within the city. We're working to develop our disposal plan, as well as working with property owners and HOAs about privately owned trees, and really just compiling all the information that we can about the MOB and about our treatment management strategies for it. Our next steps would be to establish what our long-term comprehensive plan is for our treatment of our Oregon white oaks. If we want to prioritize those for treatment, what significance does that hold to the city, and what does that look like years in the future? And then, as we mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, it's not going to just target Oregon white oak trees. It will likely have an impact on all of our oaks and some other trees. So developing a plan on if and how we want to treat those species as well. And that's really our action plan where we're at this moment. And I want to thank you all again for listening to us tonight, and we'd hope to answer any questions you may have.
I have a question.
Councilor Barrett.
Thank you for that report. That's a lot of information and not real good news, except for the good news is I think that we have a team that's getting on top of it. That's impressive. So when you do the vaccine for a tree, I was just kind of curious what the costs are. And like, we don't really know, is that just a one-time thing, or is that going to be like an annual vaccine? And what, then what, I guess I'm really curious about all the costs, besides just the enjoyment of being able to have beautiful trees and how it keeps our air clean and all that good stuff. But like the cost to do the vaccination and the cost to cut down a tree, what are the costs that are involved?
Lyle might be able to get us some more exact numbers. In terms of treatment schedule, it would be every 3 years. So that is why we may prioritize oaks that are important to treat. The cost is calculated based on the DBH of the tree. So the size of the tree impacts how much it's going to actually cost. I think, I would go to Lyle to see exactly, do you have a kind of an example DBH?
Yeah, so it runs right around that 13 to 15 cents per caliper inch. So if a 48-inch tree would be about $13 per inch.
So not too much. And then I think earlier you mentioned like the trees that line the road in Charbonneau. Those are the type of trees that potentially could be impacted, right?
They are red oak trees, so we have not yet seen them impacted. We're only currently seeing it in Oregon white oaks, but they are oak, and so they can be targeted by this borer.
Because that would be, in my view, something we'd want to prioritize.
Well, thank you. Going in order, I see Councilor Dunwell.
Thank you for bringing this to our attention. Anyone who's seen Charlotte Lehan's presentations on the importance of the trees in our city understand how critical this is. And I'm really glad that the partnership and that secondary press release went out beyond Wilsonville, so it garners greater attention. A couple of questions. Do we have an ability to compel the HOAs to treat their trees?
That's an interesting question. I think we can educate our HOAs. As far as I'm aware, we don't have a mechanism to essentially force a particular type of treatment on a tree. And we have language in our code talking about protecting Oregon white oaks, but none of that relates to actually treating the trees.
So, and the reason I bring that up is stepping back, and I think about whenever a new development goes into place or new construction, one of the considerations is protection of the existing trees that are of value. And, but once the construction is complete, unless the city owns that space, it does fall upon the HOA, and certain individuals may be concerned about the trees in their neighborhood, but not anywhere else, and vice versa. So is there a mechanism, or are you thinking about any type of program where we could help fund the treatment if it's on private property and the HOA or the individual chooses not to treat? Because obviously it becomes a greater problem if the tree's not inoculated or treated, because then it again spreads the borer. So it seems as if we have a vested interest in every tree that could potentially be infected or treated, in making sure that we're doing everything we can to stop that.
Yeah, I think that could be part of the conversation when talking about what the long-term plan may be within the city. I don't know if, Chris, you wanted to add anything there, but we have partnered with a few private property owners to cost share, and that's been relatively informal, and just reaching out to those property owners and saying, these are very special trees. We're willing to do our part if you could do your part, and we've entered a few of those in this process so far. But I don't believe we have anything at this time in our code that could force this sort of treatment in an HOA.
Yeah, not aware of mechanisms to compel. I think the biggest thing is this dialogue back and forth. The cost of removal of trees is very expensive compared to the treatment process. So I think if you understand that your entire grove could be gone and it could cost you tens of thousands of dollars, that might result in different decisions than you might otherwise make in the short term to try to avoid that. The other thing I would mention is it's possible that programs like community enhancement grants could be a source of funding. And in chatting with Brian, we had a brief conversation where that could be a source for an HOA. So we may see applications in the future along those lines of trying to leverage the community enhancement funding to try to do some good work on behalf of HOAs to maintain and preserve those trees as well.
I go back to my very first question, which is the census. Did the city perform a census of our trees so that we know where all of our white oaks or any our trees are located or species?
So we did a comprehensive street tree inventory that maybe what
That's what I was thinking about.
So that's
And our urban forest.
in our urban forest, correct. So that was all trees within a certain distance of all the streets in Wilsonville. So if you have groups and groves that are on private property and not near a street, none of those trees would have been picked up on that. So I reached out to Charlotte last week. We're going to undertake a comprehensive mapping exercise. I want to get everything in GIS. The state agencies are using GIS. We're going to use our cartograph system, which is our asset management software, to actually input the treatments that we're making on specific coordinates. So if none of us are here in 3 years, that the cartograph program will kick out work orders that say you're supposed to be treating tree X, Y, Z, and it'll give us reminders in the future about what it is we should be doing with these white oaks. So trying to build all these systems is time consuming and slow. We just discovered actual field evidence on September 8th. We're here on the 18th, 10 days later. We're all running full-time assignments on top of this. So we're working at it, and we will get there, but we're not there today.
I do have one more question. So you mentioned that you're still unsure of what the efficacy is of the treatments. Historically, do you have any data?
So the ambrosia beetle is a long-time insect in the United States, and our lab has been doing work with ambrosia beetles for 50, 60 years. And we have a lot of experience with ambrosia beetles in the East Coast and such. So this Mediterranean oak borer is a new insect, and you can't assume that what worked for one ambrosia you have is the same. So we're doing a lot of work down in California with the live oaks as well as their white oaks with the same insect that is also down there. So we're kind of building the plan, or building the treatment based on that evidence. And with the discovery here, I'm certain that our lab will be doing additional testing on the efficacy. But with the treatments that we're doing on those other trees, this treatment has a very good success rate. It's the same product that we're using and the same treatment that we're using on emerald ash borer now that we have that in Oregon. And so the efficacy on that is 98%.
That's hopeful. Councilor Linville.
Thank you. Very concerning news for sure. One of the areas that I wonder if we could get some assistance with an assessment, and that is we have one golf course in this city, and it is tree lined all the way around. Many are conifers, but they are not HOA owned trees, and so it seems to me that it would be really great if we could get an assessment of those trees that are maybe potential. And then I guess the other question is, how do citizens identify their own white oak trees? We have a number of different oaks, and so identifying white oaks versus red oaks and some of the others may be different. And I know, I think some of them right now, aren't they dropping nuts, right? A lot of them are right now. And so I think it would be really helpful to get some information out so that if even homeowners had a tree, and it sounds like it would be reasonable to have some treatment done, how do they, what are the resources? Who do they contact? I know that our, probably our arborists and our tree maintenance folks are going to be inundated with requests, and maybe not all of our companies even know how to manage this at this point. So, but I am concerned about, interestingly enough, about 2 weeks ago, I had a request from the property manager out at Charbonneau who was concerned about some of the oaks dying. And that was on French Prairie. And we know already that a number of those had significant damage during the ice storm. And he was just asking me, who do I talk to in the city, because I'm concerned that we're losing some of our oaks. So I think we probably need to move that assessment too.
And we have some.
Can I ask one?
Oh,
just go ahead. Sorry.
Just to tag along that, so the inventory, but part of that inventory should be when somebody does do a treatment, it would be really nice if we could keep those records too. Right. So like what Chris was saying earlier.
Thank you. So, Council President Ockerville, and then Councilor Dunwell.
Thank you. I wonder, goodness, we all have so many ideas and thoughts percolating in our heads on this, but one thing that occurs to me when we're listening to this is, are there trees that are perhaps on private property that are in decline, maybe already being taken out, and nobody knows that there's an infection happening in that tree? So I wonder, like, I don't know the details of our tree removal permit process. Are there questions asked when somebody gets a tree removal permit, like, that would help us identify the scale of the was that tree an affected tree, just to kind of gather some of that data and information. And another thought that I have, is we're all talking about how can we coordinate with these property owners and HOAs and things like this. How do we go upstream as well, because this is not just a Wilsonville issue. This will affect other communities around us and the state as a whole. So what do we anticipate or expect from state level partners and leadership on this? Because this is not just Wilsonville, and I guess do we know any information about that? And I'm a little surprised to hear that that a specimen was collected and we weren't notified. So what are those lines of communication look like? I mean, both the lateral and the vertical, because it seems it's just critical that we have better communication in all of those directions.
Thank you. Councilor Dunwell.
Just a thought, I'm sure everybody else has thought about this too, but, not only communicating this hopefully through the media, but also every resident gets the messenger at the beginning of the month, and to make that a priority.
We do have a deadline on Boone's Ferry Messenger tomorrow. I happen to know.
It's frontlining. It's headlining already.
It's already headlined. Okay, these are all wonderful ideas for a way to address a really terrible problem. And I do agree that I think we've all heard, we have some individual homeowners here tonight who have an oak who are coming to talk to us. It's all over the state probably. If it isn't, it will be. So I think that we should ask our government relations staff to make some inquiries tomorrow about statewide resources across the state to address this. Maybe before they mail out the kickers.
Good luck.
I don't know how that works.
So one last thought.
Okay.
So since if they are removing a tree and they have to get a permit, I don't know, how much control we have on the disposal, but it sounds like the disposal of the wood that's been infected is part of the problem. And so at least maybe we can have some education on that when they get their permits.
For sure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Council.
Very much appreciate that. And that will bring us to our citizen input and community announcements section. This is an opportunity for visitors to address the city council on items not on the agenda. It's also a time to address items that are on the agenda but are not scheduled for a public hearing. Staff and the city council will make every effort to respond to questions raised during citizen input before tonight's meeting ends or as quickly as possible thereafter. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes. Do we have anyone wishing to testify? Either your choice.
My name is Stephen Benson. I live in Daydream Ranch, and I have a really big oak tree.
Okay.
I just mostly want to thank the staff of Wilsonville to getting the heads up on this so fast. And already you guys are starting to think about things. And the only thing I thought about is there any way to compel that a tree taken down cannot be removed by ordinance? I don't know if there's any way, should you make anything that strong?
We still have our team here listening, so that's added to the list of questions.
Yeah, so.
Because it seems like a public health issue.
Yeah, and it's all been brought up about, if some trees don't get treated and others do, it's not going to stop the spread. Obviously, you're not going to stop it completely, but you got to come up with ways to slow it down. Anyway, you guys are doing a good job. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve. All right, any other people wanting to testify on the phone or Zoom or in person? Okay, hearing none, that brings us to councilor comments, liaison reports, and meeting announcements, starting with Council President Agrawal.
Thank you. Let's see, since our last meeting, I've attended a number of things, but I just wanted to first emphasize some of the mayor's comments and appreciation thanks to staff on their role in facilitating and hosting the Party in the Park, because I think it was a great event and we had a terrific turnout, and I know that's thanks to a lot of work from staff. So please share that great appreciation. It's a fun event. I mean, we had a duck costume this year, right? And all the booths. I mean, there's a lot of thought that goes into that, a lot of effort. So thank you. I also attended, August 23rd, I attended a documentary that was hosted by the Westland Wilsonville School District, and the film is called Forget Me Not. And there was a showing of the documentary followed by kind of a Q&A with the documentary filmmakers and also parents of students in our school district. And I thought it was a great event. I appreciated the school district for hosting that and for just kind of opening up this community dialogue. Our district is one of the few in the nation that no longer segregates any students that are served by special education, which is the topic of the documentary, I guess I should say that, into separate classrooms with separated services. But the documentary showed some parents' experience with their student that was in New York, which looks very different from the system that we have here in the Westland Wilsonville School District. But it was opening a great conversation, beyond schools for us to think about how do we welcome and engage and incorporate all community members. So I just really, really appreciated that. Was a powerful and a great evening. I've also been able to attend our very first meeting with the Wilsonville, I guess our working title of the group is the Wilsonville Child Care Consortium, that our economic development, Matt Lorenzen, is helping set that up. We had an excellent meeting, such good feedback from some of the child care providers in Wilsonville, and learning just to a deeper degree some of the struggles and hurdles that they have with their businesses, and learning about staffing issues and it's a big topic that has gathered some attention, especially recently in the last few years, just kind of the critical state of childcare in the country overall. But I came out with such hopes for our potential and ability to do something in Wilsonville. So that was great. And I also went to thank Representative Neron, who attended that meeting. And that was, I think, one of the key successes too, so that we were able to talk about, things that were being experienced by some of these small businesses, oftentimes small businesses in Wilsonville, but are really affected by some of the decisions that are happening on state level too, and able to just kind of encourage that free conversation and feedback. And it was excellent. I look forward to our next meeting. And I was able to attend along with the mayor, but I don't know that you got to say any comments about it, but we both participated as judges in the door decoration competition. Should I make? And we haven't talked about that, but at Wood Middle School they have a new tradition of decorating doors with their advisory groups, and so we were invited to serve on the judging group for this school competition, school spirit kind of event. And there were still some students in the building when we were doing our judging for after school, I think, cross-country activities. And I heard several students say, "Oh, the mayor's even coming." And so, I think that shows they knew the mayor was even coming to view their work. And so that's a really cool thing. Thank you for being there.
Well, I will say that must mean the entire council. It's really cool to know that our young students care about their civic engagement. And they also had some very nice doors. Did we hear the winner yet?
Yes.
Do you want to share that?
I hope I get it right. Okay, so I don't know the official titles of the door, but 8th grade, it was the Kool-Aid themed door. 7th grade, it was the exploding cow. This all sounds very odd, but if you would have seen the doors, it makes a little bit more sense. 7th grade was the exploding cow. In 6th grade, it was the one with the penguins.
Yes.
And then the constellation, the star constellation. I think you remember that. So, as you can hear, creative ideas there.
And the theme was there. They had a theme. They included everybody, and it was recognizing differences and collaboration.
Yeah, and traits that each advisory group are bringing forward. What traits do they find in their advisory class?
Creativity.
Yes.
And so one of
emphasize creativity.
You'd have to see it to understand.
Yeah. So, yeah, and thank you to the school for involving us too, because that's a treat as well.
All right, Councilor Linville.
Thank you. On the 6th of September, I attended our monthly opioid settlement prevention, treatment, and recovery board meeting. And that meeting was strictly focused on doing, if you can imagine, a visioning exercise and consensus building on using, really what the board role and function is, and how we want to arrive at decision-making for distribution of the funds and decision-making. So some very interesting things, and I think the entire board came away feeling optimistic that we're not just sitting there spinning our wheels. And so at our next meeting, it's my understanding that we will get several models to look at for distribution of the funds within the state. The one thing, if you all recall, our city manager sent out on the 23rd of August the accepted uses And we have not come back to revisit that item for the council, so I would like to ask that we figure out a way to come to some agreement about how our city wants to use that portion of the funds that comes directly to the city. And if you'll recall, the decision was, do we make decisions about it and use of that money and distribute it within our own community, or do we act as a collective and turn all of our money over to Clackamas County? And so, but we have not come, what we did is we left with asking the city manager to send us the list of the accepted uses, and I think we've gotten that, so I think we just need to revisit to make a decision.
Thank you. Since you've brought that up, Ms. Troha, could we put that on the next agenda item, please?
Yeah, I just made a note of it.
Thank you.
We'll get back to you at your next meeting.
Good. And then I will be attending on next week the Greater Portland, Inc. Annual Summit, Economic Development Summit, and both Matt Lorenzen and I have been invited to sit at the PGE.
I know you're a good golfer.
The PGE table. And Matt will be attending the VIP session that starts at 7:30. And there's one of the panelists is going to do a private Q&A, and I thought better than both of us attending that, better for him to do that. So he will be doing that. And then on the 26th, I think we have another Metro, if I'm not correct, we're not going to have that meeting on the 26th, okay. So then on the 28th is I'll attend the Greater Portland, Inc. Small Cities Consortium meeting. And then on that day as well, there are several of us that are going to meet with the new director, the officials from the Oregon Department of Aviation. I think the mayor and I will be at that meeting. So we're optimistic that maybe we can get a collaborative relationship developed and moving forward. And then I wanted to just really, I know that one of these events is a little far out, but two events that I wanted to just, especially for our citizens that are watching, on the 23rd of September, the Wilsonville community seniors are having a spaghetti fundraiser at the community center at 5 o'clock. And so if you're don't have dinner plans on the 23rd, then come to dinner. And they're looking for people to buy tickets. And a great festival a great fundraiser to support. And then just to mark calendars, and hard to believe, but within a month, on the 21st of October, is our fall festival. And who can believe that summer's over and we're on our way to getting into fall. So just mark your calendars, and another great event put on by our city staff.
Thank you. Councilor Berry.
Thank you. So let's see, on August 29th, I attended the Wilsonville Metro Community Enhancement Committee. And we've been working on preparing applications and the process for grants. So one of the key things is that we're really working on an outreach program so that anybody that would like to apply for a grant, we're very interested, so would be the contact person. So that's something to think about. Earlier, we were talking about possibly having the HOAs or local people applying for environmental grants. That might be something that could be considered. On September 6th, I attended the Tourism Promotion Committee, and they have been working really hard. We have a rebranded Explore Wilsonville website that's up and going. It looks great. I really encourage everybody to check it out. It will give you lots of ideas of what you can do locally here if you're looking for places to go shopping or dining or activities, either within the city or nearby locations. And then this year, our consultants has been keeping track of the website and social media, and we've really had great success in increasing that traffic percentage-wise. And let's see what else. We're working on our goals for the social and the website. And then upcoming, I have a meeting this Wednesday for the Metro C4 Subcommittee. That's my report.
Thank you, Councilor Berry. Councilor Dunwell.
Just a few things. Today I actually had my first meeting. Today I had my first meeting where I attended for the Washington County Coordinating Committee. Interesting. It was all about transportation. And the no surprise that tolling was part of the discussion. And it's interesting because even though Washington County isn't immediately impacted by the 205 and 5, it is a discussion topic. So there was a lot of very healthy dialogue. But there was also a significant discussion about future shortfalls. And I think that that's something that all of the counties will be discussing on transportation as far as what's going to happen in 2027 and beyond, because we do have infrastructure issues in our roads. French Prairie meets on Wednesday, the forum, and this is going to be a very interesting French Prairie forum because it's actually going to focus on agriculture in French Prairie. And because we are so adjacent and that land is so precious to us, it ties into discussions about just about everything that happens on the other side of the river that impacts us. And so I'm very excited about listening in on that call. And just one more thing, and I want to go back to what Councilor Agrawal was talking about with the door decoration contest, because I also attended the party in the park. And I spent time encouraging some of our youth who were sitting at one of the little booths. And I don't remember what group they were with, but we had a long discussion when they saw that I was a city councilor. Well, what does that mean? And I said, well, you need to participate at some point. I talked about how exciting it was and what a city councilor did, and to think about running as soon as they're legally eligible to. I think having that diversity in our council, in everything that touches our city, is important. And so they were pretty fired up about it. We'll see if one of them shows up in the future. So all right, I'm very excited about that. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Dunwell. That brings us to our consent agenda. Will the city attorney please read the items?
Resolution number 3085, a resolution of the City of Wilsonville authorizing the city manager to enter into an intergovernmental agreement with Metro for receipt of local share funds. Resolution number 3086, a resolution of the City of Wilsonville authorizing the city manager to execute the Tri-County Metropolitan Transportation District of Oregon, TriMet, subrecipient agreement, and minutes of the August 21, 2023 City Council meeting.
Thank you. The consent agenda has been read. Council President Agrawal, may I have a motion to approve it as read?
I move to approve the consent agenda as read.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
The motion has been moved by Council President Agrawal and seconded by Councilor Berry. All in favor, say aye.
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 Motion passes 5-0. That one who is on the Zoom meeting who has not yet testified but would like to testify to do so. After each person testifies, counselors may pose questions to me to be addressed by the person who testified or to staff to clarify any information that was conveyed in the testimony. Once the City Council has heard from everyone and the City Council is satisfied it has all the information it needs to render a decision, the public hearing will be closed. Council deliberates and I will announce the result. We wish to hear from everyone who wishes to testify. However, we request that you refrain from repeating testimony already given by someone else. If you agree with what someone has said before you, please provide your testimony indicating that you concur with what has previously been said. Public testimony will be limited to 3 minutes. We will time the testimony and provide you with a visual warning when there is 1 minute remaining. The public hearing is now open. We will now hear the staff presentation.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Amanda Guile-Hinman, City Attorney. Tonight, we are having the public hearing on city parking lot regulations. So the agenda for tonight is I'm going to give some background on what led to this potential code amendment, and then we'll go briefly over the proposed addition to the Wilsonville Code. So starting with the background, which the council may be familiar with, we discussed this at the work session. There's two main reasons why we're looking at doing this a potential code amendment regarding regulating our city-owned parking lots. The first is the state has implemented the Oregon Climate Friendly and Equitable Communities, or CFEC policy. It's in the Oregon Administrative Rules. And what that has done is it essentially has rendered it's made it so cities can't enforce parking minimums under certain circumstances. So if you're within a certain distance of a major mass transit route, then you're limited on being able to impose parking minimums. It just so happens that for Wilsonville, because of our major transit routes through SMART, that the vast majority of the city falls under those areas that we can no longer enforce parking minimums. The exceptions are in Charbonneau and the northwest corner of the city. So what that means is as there's future development where they have less parking than what we would normally require, there could be this pressure on our city-owned parking lots where we're going to see overflow parking from adjacent private development. Without any sort of parking regulations to address that, then we're left with potential long-term overflow parking being used on our city-owned parking lots rather than being used for those customers and community members who are using the city-owned parking lots for the city facilities for which they're assigned. The second reason is in response to is tied to the city's response to House Bill 3115, as this council decided that there is a designated vehicle camping area located at the western edge of the City Hall parking lot. That camping area is limited from 9 p.m. to 7 a.m., but then there's this question about when does a vehicle go from camping to simply parking in the city-owned parking lot. And so with that gray area, it makes it more difficult to enforce if we have an issue where somebody is camping beyond or has their vehicle located in that area, particularly beyond the 7 a.m. stop time. So we felt like it was warranted to come to the council to address these two issues, but the more immediate issue being this response to the House Bill 3115. So that led to the proposed Wilsonville Code 10.800 through 10.870. The city staff looked at other examples in other jurisdictions of regulations regarding parking and had presented those some options to council of how the code could be formatted. And what the council's direction was to provide yes, do parking regulations, but to have flexibility that it could be done at an administrative level through the city manager. So what the code will do is it'll delegate authority to the city manager to establish parking lot time regulations. There's a requirement that notice be given to the public before there's an adoption of new parking regulations or modification to any existing regulations that are in place. However, there is an allowance for temporary or emergency rules. With that, there's a specific time frame that's tied to that, but it also allows for a later permanent adoption going through the normal notice process. There's council review, potential council review. If council wants to call up any regulations that are going to be imposed or have been imposed, council can review that and make changes. And then finally, there's enforcement under Chapter 1 of our code. And I do want to note, because this has come up to council before, is that there's been prior discussion about updates to Chapter 1 regarding enforcement. So this is noted to reflect Chapter 1 with the idea that we'll probably be amending Chapter 1 regarding enforcement at some point in time. And so we're trying to make sure that all of our enforcement regulations refer to Chapter 1 rather than having their own. So that way we're only amending one chapter when that time comes. So right now, the enforcement basically says that we do, for violations, that we can do fines up to $500 per day per violation. That's the current rule. So next steps, assuming adoption tonight, is that council will have a second reading on October 2nd at its next council meeting, and then the ordinance goes into effect 30 days after. We're already working on putting together a city team to look at site-specific regulations. So the likely intent is that we will have different regulations for different parking lots depending on the use. So that should be coming probably in the later part of the fall. I anticipate probably a January 1 implementation date for most. City Hall may be the exception given the camping area. So with that, I'll take any questions.
Thank you. One of the questions I had really related to a comment that I think Councilor Berry made at a previous, either at a work session or when we were discussing this previous. Since there will probably be, or there will be site-specific parking regulations, my assumption is there will be signage.
That's correct. Yep. Yeah. So you'll note there was a note in the staff report about budget for this. We anticipate that there will definitely need to be signage because you can't tow if there's not a sign that says these are the parking regulations and you're subject to tow if you don't follow the parking regulations. So there will definitely be signage. We anticipate that signage for the most part will be able to be absorbed in current budgets, but there may, depending on the rollout and what signage costs are looking like, there could be the possibility of a supplemental budget request tied to signage.
That just reminds, and this topic, I think this is an important move for us, but it reminds me to go back to our values that we all passed when we discussed this about in summary. It's important to this council that we commit to doing all that we can to help people exit homelessness. So whereas somebody may need parking because they are experiencing homelessness, we have Clackamas County as our partner. And I just wanted to make note that as we may have discussed at this meeting, well, I know that we discussed many times, the Supportive Housing Services tax measure is producing an additional $40 million annually for 10 years. There's another 8 years of that to go. In addition, the county announced in June that due to a delayed collection of some of the first taxes or payment, it just took a while for people to pay, in addition to the anticipated $40 million per year that is used to help with response to people experiencing homelessness in a number of ways, there is an additional $58.6 million. So I just think just a chance for us to remember that as part of Clackamas County, we want to be diligent in finding out what our role is in helping use those funds with the county to get people into housing and jobs.
So, Mayor, may I ask you a question then about that as it relates just to my question about the signs? Is it reasonable my assumption is that the signs are going to say parking between da-da-da, 9 but whatever it'll say on the sign, or 2-hour parking or whatever else. Is it reasonable to put down on the bottom of all of those signs, Clackamas Supportive Housing Services and the telephone number?
Well, that's a good point. I don't know if we'd put the telephone number. I know that we've got the card with the QR codes, and you had talked about putting QR codes on signs so that people can take a picture of that. I think we have some of those. Do we need more? Do we need more to remind people of these resources? We also do have people parking, in commercial lots who are experiencing homelessness. So anyway, I think a sign with verbiage may also help just educate anybody who's just so that our community knows about this. So Amanda, what do you know about the signs?
I think anything regarding signs is something that we could talk through specifically about the camping regulations is something that we could talk through with our camping implementation team. I have found that they are really insightful and have really good ideas for...
They've thought it through.
Yeah, and so to the extent that that there might be an educational component and we want to make sure we're getting the word out, I definitely want to float that through them and see, what are the best avenues. Maybe...
How's it working?
Yeah, because I do find that right now what we're seeing are the people who are using the designated vehicle camping area, we're making pretty quick, consistent contact with them and giving them the information. So maybe it is something where information is directed in other places. Maybe that would be the best route. I don't know that. And so I think running it through that team, and that's something, outside of this public hearing on this process, something that we could definitely we'll continue to bring updates back with you, because one of the other things, as the mayor mentioned about the supportive housing services money, is we are in pretty regular contact with the county staff about how that money is being used and what opportunities there may be. So I definitely foresee more information on that front.
Thank you.
Down the road.
So I just, thanks for having that discussion, because while we're talking about towing and limits, it's started with the premise of the values and what is our role with Wilsonville Community Sharing, churches in our area, heart of the city. How are we all working together to make it so that fewer people need to have that problem?
Yes, and just to reiterate, I know council is very well aware of this, but we always come from a compliance first standpoint where we try to work with whomever is a potential violator of our code to gain compliance. One of the issues that we've seen here is this is a gray area where we can't definitively say it's a compliance issue, right? So having that being able to say it is a compliance issue and now let's work on how we get to compliance. This is a tool that we definitely need in the toolbox, but yeah, to reiterate, the first step is not just go tow somebody if it seems like there's a camping situation.
We hope we don't have to do that. Yeah. Thank you. Councilor Dunwell.
I'm really intrigued by what Councilor Linville just mentioned about the signage, because one of the things that I've noticed within Wilsonville, even since the camping ordinance passed, is you still see individuals during the day that are parking on private lots or wherever they may be. And to at least even have a QR code on these signs, these new signs, and just say in need of assistance, whatever it may be, to make it easy, because I continue to think about, we are not a social service organization. Our responsibility is significantly different, but yet we also have a responsibility to anyone who comes through this city. And to be able to at least have something like that on new signage could really be, I don't know if any other cities are doing something like that, to be able to just have it front and center, that it's available, that those services, and QR codes are amazing for that. And you're already paying the cost for new signage. So to just include something like that, because I always think of our homeless as our invisible population, and how many of those individuals that you all have been in contact with that have, that you've reached out to the following morning have said, no one has contacted me. I didn't know where to go for help. To at least make that available, because like I said, it's often a very invisible segment of our population.
Thank you. So that would go to your team about the signs as well?
Right, well, and I think if I'm, correct me if I'm mistaken, but Councilor Dunwell, I think your point was specifically about signs that go up about the parking regulations. Yeah, yes.
So, thank you. That's, now, going back to my procedures here, we're in the hearing. And I want to ask if any counselors have any questions of staff at this time. One of my favorite questions that I like to say a lot, apparently. Please.
So this parking, it says in your report that the expected result is the key priorities are City Hall parking lot, library parking lot, and the community center or public works parking lot.
Correct. That's where we're currently seeing some issues regarding parking, where having the clarification would be, having some regulations and having it posted would be very helpful. And it's also areas where a QR code could probably be helpful.
Okay. So is it, I'm just checking again with staff to see if we have anyone wanting to provide testimony on any of the channels. Just checking. Many steps here. Does staff have anything further to add to the record at this time, or does City Council have any additional questions for staff?
Nothing further from me.
Okay. Looks like we've got all that in the detail. Hearing no further questions and everyone having testified, I hereby declare this public hearing closed at 8:43 p.m. on Monday, September 18th. Does the city, may I have a motion?
I move to adopt ordinance 881 on first reading.
Is there a second?
I will second that motion.
The motion has been made by Councilor Berry and seconded by Councilor Linville. Is there any discussion? All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes 5-0. That brings us to ordinance number 882 on first reading, a legislative land use hearing. Could the city attorney please read the ordinance?
This is the first reading of ordinance number 882, an ordinance of the City of Wilsonville amending the text of the Development Code to clarify review processes and correct inconsistencies.
Tonight, we will have a public hearing to consider on first reading ordinance number 882. This comes to us as a recommendation from the Planning Commission. The order of procedure for tonight's hearing is set out in detail in our city code. In brief, we will start with a staff report. Next, the public will be asked to provide testimony. I will ask everyone who signed up in advance to testify first in the order in which they signed up. Then I will ask if anyone present in council chambers would like to testify. And then I will ask anyone who is on the Zoom meeting who has not yet testified but would like to testify to do so. After each person testifies, councilors may pose questions to me to be addressed by the person who testifies or to staff to clarify any information that was conveyed in the testimony. Once the City Council has heard from everyone and the City Council is satisfied it has all the information it needs to render a decision, the public hearing will be closed. Council deliberates, and I will announce the result. We wish to hear from everyone who wants to testify. However, we request that you refrain from repeating testimony already given by someone else. If you agree with what someone before you has said, but you want to ensure that you have legal standing in the public record, please provide your testimony indicating that you concur with what has previously been said. Public testimony will be limited to 3 minutes. We will time the testimony and provide you with a visual warning when there is 1 minute remaining. Since this is a legal process for considering a land use decision, we need you to state your name and address for the public record. The public hearing is now open. We will now hear the staff presentation.
All right, good evening. My name is Kim Reibold. I am senior planner here with the City of Wilsonville. And tonight I'm going to present ordinance number 882, which are the development code process clarifications. So we originally brought this item before you at a work session in August, but just as a quick reminder for the record, the purpose of these amendments is to do a couple of quick house cleaning clarification types of amendments to the development code. The main goals here being sure that we have clarity around some of our review processes and making a minor adjustment to one of those. As it pertains to certain application types, clarify the requirements for some certain application types, particularly wireless communication facility applications, and correct a couple of inconsistencies that we've noted in the development code related to process and procedure for submitting applications and appeals. So I just want to note that these changes are procedural in nature. We're not looking to change or amend policies as it relates to process. So the primary amendments that are within these slate of changes are related to wireless communications facilities. This is section 4.800 through 4.814 of the development code. A couple issues here and what are driving these changes. The main one being related to some federal requirements around a certain type of wireless communication facility that is subject to a process that we refer to as 6409A. That was some changes that were made in federal requirements a handful of years ago that require for certain wireless co-locations. So making a change to a part of a facility that's on a larger facility, that those should be processed and approved by a city if they fall within certain parameters within a certain short time period. We only get up to 60 days to clarify that it's complete and take an action and have that action be final. And so that is challenging often with the noticing requirements that we have via our current Class 2 process for these applications. And we don't really have any ability to incorporate any public comment because it really is a ministerial type of decision. Likewise, the way that our code is currently written, which came kind of into its current form when we did amend it to accommodate these 6409As back in 2016, I believe, is that it's kind of confusing as to which development application requirements apply to which types of applications. So for instance, these 6409As, you don't have to provide, and we cannot require an applicant to provide everything that we list in the development code. However, if we had a new facility, we would be applying all those standards. And so the proposed changes we have are really more of a reorganization mostly to clarify which application requirements apply to which types of facilities, so that hopefully it adds some clarity for both staff, the public, and applicants. We're clarifying which types of uses are permitted versus which have to go through a conditional use process, and then updating that 6409A review process to a Class 1 to better align the review timeline. We do have a handful of other minor edits within the development code as well, just to add some clarification to existing process or clean up inconsistencies. The first of these is about the extension of development approvals. There were some amendments adopted in 2009 that added some language to the primary section that covers extensions, which is 4.023. However, there's similar language that's also in 4.140 that was not amended. So there are inconsistent timelines for the process, as well as just different language about what needs to be provided, so we are cleaning that up. And we're also removing some outdated references to certain applications that were filed between 2009 and 2010, since that is no longer relevant. We are also adding some clarifying language in the temporary use permit requirements in 4.030 as it relates to the criteria versus class 1 and class 2. It's the same type of application, the only difference is duration of those permits, and so we want to be sure that we're clearly applying the same criteria for both. Likewise, we have language for temporary sign permits in section 4.156, and we just want to add some abundant clarity that you can get a temporary sign permit subject to the standards listed in that chapter, but you have to apply for a permit still. And then the last set of edits relates to what is considered filed when it comes to either an application or an appeal. We want to add some abundant clarity to both sections 4.011 and 4.022, that in order for these applications to be considered filed, you have to have payment of the fee, and then in the case of the development application, you do have to have the property owner signature as well. These are things that are consistent with our current practice. We just want to make sure that the development code is abundantly clear on those topics. So with that, the Planning Commission held a public hearing on Wednesday, September 13th regarding the proposed development code amendments that are included in your packet. The Planning Commission voted unanimously to recommend approval of the proposed amendments to City Council. And so with that, the staff recommendation is that City Council adopt this Planning Commission recommendation, which would adopt ordinance number 882 on first reading, thereby adopting these development code amendments. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Any questions?
I have a question.
Councilor Berry.
So when the Planning Commission adopted it, did they have any major comments that we should be aware of?
No, they did not have any. There was just some clarifying questions, but there were no major recommendations or edits to that proposed language that's in your packet.
I'm not seeing any other questions. We wish, so I think I've already read all of this. Is there anyone waiting to testify online, on Zoom? No one is here. Seeing no testimony and hearing no further questions, the public hearing is now closed. Do I have a motion to adopt the resolution, the ordinance 882?
I move to adopt ordinance 882 on first reading.
Is there a second?
I will second.
The motion to adopt ordinance number 882 has been moved by Councilor, as on first reading, has been read by Councilor Berry and seconded by Councilor Linville. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion passes 5-0. All right, that brings us to the close of our meeting. So I will adjourn the City Council meeting at 8:54 p.m. And we will reconvene. We have an executive session now. Do you want a couple minute break? So
did you want to go through city manager and legal
business?
Oh, I'm sorry.
City manager.
I had nothing under
business.
this.
I have really...
Okay, let me unadjourn the meeting. The meeting is still ongoing. And
I don't know if Amanda has anything, but mine are relatively quick and fun items. So a couple things to put on your calendar. We have the Story Walk grand opening event which is on Friday, October 13th at 2:30. There's going to be a ribbon cutting. This is a partnership between our library and our Parks and Recreation Department. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, we take a storybook, a children's storybook, and they put it on boards and put it in the park. It's going to be in Villebois. They're going to meet at the corner of Denmark and Coffee Lake Drive, and then walk along that path that goes along Coffee Lake Drive in Villebois. And so there'll be, I think the children's book is Bear Came Along, so it sounds very exciting. So that's on October 13th, and then
What time is that, Gina?
2:30. 2:30 is the...
We're at LOC.
It is, yeah.
It'll be over by then, but.
Yeah.
Oh, no, the story walk exists for, I don't remember how long it's out there, but it's more than just that day. They keep it out there for more than just that day.
permanent.
So you can go out and walk it when you get back on a nice sunny day. And then the emergency preparedness community event we have scheduled for October 28th. That is from 10 till noon. It's going to be in the Steinboucher barn, and we'll make sure we get that information out to you. I just got that from Delora today, so I'm going to pass it on. That's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, sorry I didn't call on you, Gina. I think at 8:45 it became.
It's been a long way.
So, any legal business?
None tonight, Mayor.
Okay. I'm going to adjourn the meeting at 8:57 PM, and we'll reconvene at 9:05 for our executive session.
Mandate.